Our story begins with the protagonist climbing some stairs. He is already quite tired and wounded. His feet are bleeding from so much effort, to the point where he has to use his hands to keep climbing. However, on the way, someone blocks his path. The stranger calls the protagonist a brat, and asks for his name. A few days ago, the boy was doing his favorite hobby, which is reading books. His name is Wang Lin, nicknamed Taiju, and by the end of the day, he will go to a place he could never have imagined. Today is the end of the month, so his fourth uncle will be arriving soon. His father approaches and tells the boy that his uncle will be here soon and asks why he is not ready yet, but the boy says he has everything prepared. The father tells the protagonist that he must be selected and must not fail to meet his uncle's expectations. Taiju affirms that he knows this. His mother hands him some sweet potatoes to eat during the journey. Excited, the boy thanks her. Soon, someone knocks on the door. Taiju goes to answer, already knowing who it is. Then he opens the gate and welcomes the visitor. His fourth uncle has finally arrived, and is happy to see his nephew. A few days ago, the uncle had already made a visit and asked the boy's parents if they had heard of the Hangyu school. They say yes, and that all the students there are saints. The uncle says that this year, Hangyu school is accepting disciples, and their clan is authorized to nominate 3 people, stating that he wants to give this opportunity to Taiju. His parents are surprised by this news. The uncle is determined to do this. Taiju is surprised by this information, seeming somewhat aloof to all of it. His uncle says that in Hangyu school, there are many saints, and they are the most formidable beings under the sky. He also says that in half a month, he will return to pick up the boy, and he must be ready by then. So the uncle fulfills his promise, and returns to pick up his nephew. The whole family travels in a carriage. The boy's father says he doesn't know the best way to thank him for such a gesture, but the uncle says they are family, and there's no need for such words. He also tells the boy that he must bring honor to his family. Suddenly, the carriage stops, and the uncle realizes they have finally arrived. The boy looks outside and is surprised by what he sees, for there are many people in the surroundings. The people congratulate him and his family upon their arrival, saying that the fact that the family has one of the candidates makes him a fortunate boy, which makes even his parents a little embarrassed. Taiju realizes he has never seen his parents so happy before. Someone approaches and calls out to Lao Er, the protagonist's father, and says it's been a long time since they last met, asking how he has been. Lao calls the man Big Brother. The brother says that having Taiju as one of the candidates is a great stroke of luck. Seeing this, the fourth uncle isn't very pleased. From another carriage, someone steps out and says that even though Taiju is one of the candidates, that doesn't mean anything. What matters is whether or not he will be able to enter the school. Taiju asks who the boy who said that is, but his uncle tells him not to pay attention to what they're saying. Even his father warns the boy not to let the pressure get to him. The other boy's father says that his son spoke unpleasant words and hopes that Lao wasn't offended by them. Then he introduces his son, Wang Zhou, to everyone. Taiju is a little impressed. He asks if Wang Zhou is really a man, and such a question displeases him. Wang Zhou simply says that he won't lower himself to the point of arguing with the protagonist. Another person appears and says that, with such rotten manners, he would indeed be in a bad mood. He also says that none of them have entered the school, and in a way, their statuses are still the same. He introduces himself to the protagonist as Wang Jie. Wang Zhou, in turn, says that they shouldn't place themselves in the same group as him. But Jie retorts by saying that the rival has a woman's face, leaving him irritated by this offense. In the middle of the argument, a light interrupts them. It is a mysterious being that lands at the scene, leaving everyone present impressed. The man simply stands as if nothing had happened, and asks which of them are the 3 candidates. Wang Jie and the protagonist introduce themselves. Lastly, the irritable Wang Zhou does as well. The man asks which of them is Wang Zhou. The boy's father promptly points to his son. Upon hearing this, the man says that Wang Zhou is certainly talented. No wonder Ning Bei Dao Su Shu recommended him. The other 2 are surprised by the man's words. Wang Zhou says that, naturally, those who are descendants of a saint will certainly be infinitely praised by the Saint Dao Su. The saint, in turn, looks at the others, and says that they will soon bid farewell to their families. Both understand the saint's order. Wang Jie hears from Wang Zhou's father that when he enters Hingyu school, he should learn from his son, to which he simply sighs in agreement. In turn, the protagonist's father calls for him, and says that if he isn't selected, he shouldn't forget to return home and not overburden himself. Taishu tells his father that he will certainly be selected. Soon after, he turns and follows the school's saint. The Saint Dao Su then calls them. As they approach him, the boys realize that the ground starts to move, but they realize it's actually a magic carpet. Before departing, Taiju looks at his parents, and they also look at their son, bidding farewell. The fourth uncle, in a colder manner, says that the boy must be chosen. Confident, Taiju states that he will definitely be selected. After arriving at the Hingyu sect, Many students are already rejected. They realize that the spiritual power test is very rigorous. The protagonist, along with the other boys, is immediately shocked. Half of them have already been tested, but none have been selected yet. The master of the place calls them one by one to test them. Saint Dao Su recalls that it was the same for them when he entered the sect, always strict. It's Wang Zhou's turn to be tested. He stands before the master, and becomes extremely nervous because of it. The master asks his name. Wang Zhou introduces himself to the man. Then the master recognizes him and asks him to go to the right. Happy, Wang Zhou does as the master said. The protagonist wonders if Wang Zhou really passed. But the master says that the first one to pass has appeared, and calls the next. He soon evaluates a girl and says that her aptitude is not bad, and tells her to also go to the right, as she has passed. Wang Zhou feels embarrassed near her. The master calls the next. Tai Zhu realizes that the second person has already been chosen. As soon as he's called, Wang Jie introduces himself to the saint and tries to flatter him, saying that he must be tired and that they could take a break. But the master says it's not necessary. Then he analyzes the boy and says that his aptitude is poor. But before concluding, Wang Jie interrupts him and shows a treasure that his father was unable to open after obtaining it, and he now offers it as a gift to the master. But the old man doesn't intend to be bribed and tries to refuse. However, he looks more closely, and notices that the item is a 300-year-old Lingji. Looking at the small jade box, it must be sealed by a practitioner. Seeing that his plan is working, Wang Jie is pleased. Then the master corrects himself, saying that he still needs a Xiaopong to help him invent Liandan. And seeing that the boy is intelligent, he asks if he's interested, and Wang Jie accepts. While some are angry, the protagonist is happy that the boy passed. The master tells him to stay to the right with the others. Frustrated, Wang Zhou thinks that he should just pretend not to know him. All the others who weren't selected start crying in sadness. With that, the master orders that all the crybabies be taken far away. Then the students in the area obey the leader's command, and tie up the other newcomers. Immediately, they are transported away. Next, the master calls the next candidate. The protagonist realizes it's his turn, and thinks about which side he will be on the side of those who succeeded, or those who failed to pass. Determined, he is sure he will succeed. As soon as he stands in front of the master, the protagonist is analyzed by the master, thinking that he will soon succeed. The master analyzes him thoroughly, and says he failed the test. Wang Zhou is pleased with the protagonist's defeat, but Wang Jie stands by his side and worries about his friend. The master points to a place and tells Tai Shu to stay there. Soon the boy wonders why he is just standing there, and why his steps feel so heavy. Remembering his parents saying everything would work out, he feels devastated by the rejection, and thinks he really is useless. The master tells everyone that the first test ends here. Those who failed should prepare for the second test. For those who passed, the master says they will accompany him to meet the patriarch. The three who passed obey the master. Wang Jie is happy to have passed, but he worries about the protagonist, saying it's best for him to give his all in the next test, because reality, at some point, is cruel, so he must keep going. Upon arriving at the next test location, the protagonist notices that it is quite tall. The second stage consists of testing their willpower. Those who can't reach the top in 3 days will fail, but those who succeed will be accepted as disciples. Tai Shu is determined to succeed this time. As soon as the challenge begins, everyone starts walking, including the protagonist, who is with the others. However, right from the start, he already feels tired, and says that not even half a day has passed. Even so, he doesn't think about giving up. Next, he notices another participant, who fell from the stairs while climbing, and shouted loudly that he gave up. Soon a strong light went toward him, and one of the sect members grabbed him, taking him away from the place. All present witness this, and the protagonist realizes that it's easy to lose, so he thinks that he cannot fail. The memory of his parents motivates him to keep going, including his uncle, who told him to bring honor to the family. Tai Zhu walks until nightfall. He remembers that, as soon as he arrived with his family, others said that his parents were fortunate to have a son as a candidate, noticing the happiness his father felt, and later told him not to be overwhelmed if he wasn't selected. But at that moment, he assured his father that he would be selected. So Tai Zhu gathers all his strength to continue. As he walks up the stairs, he leaves a trail of blood on the ground. His hands are being used for support, and are already very injured. Even his shoes are worn out from walking so much. At a certain point, he can no longer move. His eyes can barely stay open, with the protagonist almost losing consciousness. Suddenly, a stranger appears and stops in front of him, and asks the boy's name. The man insists on knowing the protagonist's name, but he ignores him and passes by. This makes the man realize something is wrong with the boy, and laments this. Although it's possible, through the formation, for him to become someone worthy, it seems their destinies are not connected. Tai Zhu slowly closes his eyes, losing consciousness. but quickly opens them again when someone notices he's waking up. Determination makes the boy stand up. However, when he opens his eyes, he notices something different. He remembers the test, but he is no longer on the stairs. His arms hurt and are completely closed. He doesn't know where he is. A student approaches, checking that everyone has woken up. Soon he tells them to get ready, because the third test is about to begin. Taiju is surprised and asks what happened to the second test. The student, however, says he doesn't know yet that he had already failed. Without further delay, he decides to explain what happened in the previous test. He says that 3 people passed, 7 gave up, and the rest failed, passing out before the 3rd day. But the student says not everyone had that outcome. Taiju wonders if he failed again. The student recalls seeing Taiju trying to climb, and although his willpower was incredible, it was still a test, and if he couldn't reach the top, he would lose. Back in the present, he tells them to prepare for the next stage. Outside a temple, Jianlingu speaks to everyone. This test is quite simple. Those who manage to enter the place have passed. Then, he tells them to begin. One of the boys walks towards the temple entrance, but he is thrown back. With just 5 steps, he was flung back to the start of the path. The next one is allowed to try, but he meets the same fate as the previous one. Another student is called once again. While the test is happening, the man on the stairs watches from a distance. He seems to be worried about the protagonist. Speaking of him, it is now his turn to be tested. Taiju thinks that this is his last chance. He walks toward the temple, counting his steps. He manages to go up to the 4th step, and cautiously reaches the 5th, but he realizes that nothing happens. Soon, the student administering the test tells him to continue, so Taiju does, heading towards the objective. Everyone around notices that he could be the first to make it across if he continues like this. However, as he gets closer to the entrance, Taiju sees the light that had thrown the other participants away. Soon, the student already calls for the next participant. Meanwhile, those who haven't taken the test yet say that the protagonist is nothing special. But Taiju hasn't given up yet and refuses to be thrown away. Everyone who witnesses this is shocked, and they wonder what kind of person Taiju is to have such strong willpower. The boy thinks this is his last chance, and he can't simply give up now. Using all his strength, he tries to move forward. The older student notices that the chi ground has turned into sword chi, and tells the protagonist not to advance, as he might end up dying. Even he can no longer get any closer. Soon, several sword chi head toward the protagonist. Some lightly graze his face, others scrape the rest of his body. But Taiju doesn't stop walking. The student realizes that something bigger is approaching. Even the protagonist sees what it is, and he realizes it's a giant sword coming toward him. However, someone appears to help him, and throws a giant sword in the direction of the other, preventing Taiju from being hit. The first sword shatters completely. The older student is surprised by such an act, and the man from before appears, saying that it's still too early for the protagonist to die and tells him to live well. Upon seeing the sword that blocked his path, Taiju doesn't quite understand what happened, and soon loses his strength, collapsing to the ground. After some time, he wakes up, and notices that his arm hurts more than before. Once again, Taiju is bettered in, but when he looks around the room, he realizes he is at home. He leaves the room to see better where he is, and sees the sky outside, wondering if he's in a dream. Outside, he notices some women talking. They are gossiping about how the protagonist recently took the test to enter Hanyu school, but unexpectedly ended up failing. Suddenly, the protagonist's 4th uncle appears and says that it's rude for the women to stand in front of the boy's house, saying such malicious words. And he asks what kind of people feel good about seeing others suffer? After being scolded, the uncle watches them quietly leave. He tries to knock on the door, but sees that it's already open. Taiju was already waiting for him, and welcomes him into his home. The uncle asks if the boy is okay, but the protagonist can't say anything. He concludes that the boy must have overheard the gossiping women talking about him. Soon, he feels sad for his nephew. He remembers that the protagonist was brought back unconscious by the same saint who took him to the school on the day the families were supposed to meet their children. The man says that something unexpected happened to Taiju during the test, and he apologizes for it. He also says that the boy only fainted and should wake up soon, so they don't need to worry. Wang Zhou appears and says that the protagonist fainted during 2 out of 3 tests, which is shameful. Wang Jia tells him to shut up because the protagonist did his best. But Zhou says that it's useless if he failed in the end. Jia's father tells him to be quiet. Even the protagonist's uncle tells them to stop talking. However, Zhou's father shows up and calls Lao Si by name. This makes the protagonist's uncle even more serious than he already was. Some of those present can feel the tension in the air. The uncle hears that some really consider his nephew useless. They also say that the gifts given to his family in the end were of no use. Back to the present, the uncle asks the boy how his body is. Taiju says it hurts a little. Lao Si says that, After he recovers, he will take his nephew outside, to the world beyond, which is not much different from the Hingyu sect. He also says that, with his potential, he bets his nephew will become even stronger than himself. The uncle tries to cheer the boy up, but Taizhu, after everything, is still frustrated for not having succeeded. His uncle simply asks if Taizhu cannot accept it. With a tearful face, Taizhu hugs his uncle, and tells him that he is sorry. He states that he did his best, and still, he couldn't succeed, concluding that this opportunity shouldn't have been given to him. His uncle says that failure means nothing as long as he doesn't give up, and assures him that the boy has done well. He also says that Taizhu still has plenty of time, and as long as he lives, there will always be a chance to win. What happened is in the past, and he shouldn't dwell on it. The important thing is what he will do in the future. Even while crying, the boy seems to understand his uncle's words. Night falls in his home, and Taizhu lies down on his bed. In another room, his father drinks a lot, despite the boy's uncle insisting that he should stop. The father feels a bit sad, and says that his son may have failed because too much pressure was placed on him. Lao says that all parents want their children to meet their expectations, so he shouldn't overthink it. The father states that he needs nothing more. All he hopes for is that his son stays safe and lives happily. That would be enough. The next day arrives for them, and the boy's mother goes to his room to call him for breakfast. But upon arriving there, she finds only a letter. Upon reading the contents, she is surprised. Taizhu wrote to his parents and uncle, apologizing for leaving for the outside world without saying anything, but he has decided to go to the sect to try the test once more. If he still fails, then he will try to join another sect, for he is determined to become a saint when he returns home. He states that he will take care of himself, and that they don't need to worry. On his journey, Taizhu encounters a tiger. The large animal frightens him. As he runs, he wonders why there is such a big tiger in his path, and he screams desperately, begging for help. But no one appears to assist him, and he ends up running to the edge of a cliff. Desperate, he doesn't know what to do. Meanwhile, the tiger approaches, and there is no other place to go. Soon Taizhu asks forgiveness from his parents for dying before fulfilling his duty as a son. Then, he attempts to jump off the cliff, but he hesitates and thinks that this is not right, for he cannot die without doing something first. Taizhu remembers that his uncle said that, as long as he lives, there will always be a chance to win. He thinks that this is indeed correct, and he cannot give up before trying. After this reflection, he faces the tiger, and waits until the animal gets closer. He stares at it with total focus. He points his staff toward the tiger. Soon, the animal tries to attack him. However, it ends up being wounded by the protagonist's staff. Seeing that he managed to defeat the tiger, Taizhu feels happy, but he quickly realizes what is happening. The force of the tiger's leap pushed him toward the cliff, and both of them fell. Taizhu says that this cannot be happening, and tries to calm himself, holding on to the tiger, as the two fall from the edge of the cliff. For a brief moment, the staff that pierced the tiger interrupts their fall, but their weight breaks the staff, and they fall into a cave. The descent is far from pleasant, and the impact when they hit the ground is painful. It isn't worse only because the tiger's body cushions the boy's fall. He is knocked unconscious after falling, and remains there, still holding on to the dead animal. When he wakes up after the fall, the protagonist looks to the side and sees some skeletons of dead animals. He is startled by this scene, and also realizes that he was lying on the dead tiger. Taizhu tries to think about what happened, and what is this, but he soon remembers falling with the tiger. Despite his aching head, he gradually recalls the events. Then he gets up and concludes that he needs to get out of this cave and continue his journey quickly. However, he hears a noise coming toward him, and he is scared by the possibility of an imminent danger. He then throws himself against the wall, trying to defend himself. But he soon realizes it was just some birds. He quickly realizes his mistake, and, after falling on top of the tiger again, he notices that this cave has a strong gravity, thinking it best to check the surroundings before leaving. Taizhu still feels pain from the fall, but as he stands up, he sees something intriguing. He approaches the tiger beside him, which still has the wooden stake in its mouth, and picks up a strange sphere from the ground. Taizhu notices that the sphere contains very realistic clouds. This triggers something in his mind, making him wonder if this is an animal's Naiden, because he once heard that if an animal lives long enough, a treasure forms within its body. If someone eats the treasure known as Naiden, their power will increase. He then looks at the tiger, which seems to have lived for a long time. He thinks that if the item really is a Naiden, it could be a positive turning point in his life. So if he eats the sphere, maybe he will be accepted into the sect. After reaching this conclusion, Taizhu tries to eat the sphere, but when he tries to bite it he can't, so he throws it away, thinking it's just a useless stone. However, the sphere ends up falling into a hole. Soon it meets some water. The sound the stone makes shows the protagonist that there is water there. Taizhu goes to check and indeed finds water. He thinks that his luck is really changing. After that, he goes to the water, and manages to drink some of it. The protagonist feels relieved after drinking, but notices that besides quenching his thirst, his body no longer hurts. Then he looks at his hands, and feels a tingling sensation, as if insects were crawling inside him. He quickly starts removing his bandages. Beneath the rags, his hands are no longer wounded. Though finding it strange, he rejoices in not being hurt anymore. He concludes that it must be due to the water he drank. Once again, he goes to the waterhole, and plunges his arms into it. A feeling arises after this. The tingling from before returns, but he realizes it's because the wounds are healing. When he removes his arms from the water, he notices that both are completely healed. Taiju then says that this water must be magical. Then, without a second thought, he throws himself completely into it. Inside, he feels happy that something good is finally happening. He notices that the tingling sensation is now all over his body, finding it a bit disgusting. But when he looks down, he notices a shiny object. He goes towards the light to see what it is. However, when he grabs the item from the water, he realizes it's the stone from before. This triggers a realization in his mind that it might be the stone responsible. Taiju then places the sphere back into the water, and realizes he was right. The water can heal wounds, but only through the stone. Now he really believes the item is a treasure. Before leaving, he takes one last dive. When he emerges, he realizes that this thing can truly heal internal injuries and apologizes to the sphere for discarding it. Taiju then returns near the tiger. Once again, he is startled by a strange noise, and realizes that, once again, he has been lucky. He looks at the wall and notices small cavities that emit sound when wind passes through them, concluding that's where the eerie noise comes from. A feather moves strangely inside, and Taiju realizes that the strange gravity appears every half hour. He quickly concludes that he has to find a way out of there fast. He goes to the end of the cave but notices there is a very high drop to jump. Above, he sees a bird on the wall where he fell, which is also too high to climb. Looking up at the sky, the bird drops some waste on him. Taiju immediately associates this with bad luck. So, he decides to use another option, and sits down to think of one. One of the options he considers is using the tiger as a cushion or going straight down, but he dismisses that, thinking he might fall and die. He feels a bit frustrated. However, an idea soon comes to his mind. Taiju starts tying some cloths together, to use them as a rope. He thinks that luckily, he brought some extra clothes, but soon realizes they are not enough. He thinks, though, that he can only follow the ledge and descend. However, before going, he needs to take one more dive. He quickly fulfills his wish. Afterwards, he ties himself tightly with the improvised rope, deciding that he will indeed climb down. Despite his fear, he starts descending, crying from fear due to the height. Midway down, the worst happens. One of the cloths tears. Upon hearing the sound, Taiju is startled. Before he can do anything, he falls. The reaction time was so short that the protagonist couldn't believe he had fallen, and only realizes it when he is about to hit the ground. With that, he falls among some trees. The protagonist appears lying in a bed. Meanwhile, he dreams about the moment he was falling through the trees. Lying down, he tosses and turns, bothered by the dream. The trees around him cushion his fall, but they didn't stop him from hitting his head on the ground. After waking up, he is startled, and realizes that he fainted again. Suddenly, a voice tells him to wake up at once. His mother asks if he feels any part of his body hurting, while his father says he really scared them. Seeing both of them, he asks what they are doing there. His father says that he still has the nerve to ask such a question after running away without saying a word, and luckily, his uncle went to the Hungyu sect and asked about him. Taiju apologizes for the way he left. His mother asks why he tried to commit suicide, but the protagonist says there must have been a misunderstanding because he didn't do that. A sect member approaches and tells his parents that he would like to speak with the boy alone, if possible. The protagonist notices that he was called Wang Shidi and feels confused, but the sect member is pleased to be able to speak with him. Zhang Shuxiong knows that the protagonist didn't try to kill himself, because he saw the dead white tiger, and the clothes he used to escape. Noticing that, in fact, the boy was fighting to survive, Taiju says yes, and asks why he didn't tell his parents about this and why he called him by a different name. Shuxiong congratulates the boy for entering the Hangyu clan. For his part, he doesn't understand what the man said. In another room, some sect members are talking, and one of them mentions causing a commotion over a useless person who attempted suicide after talking about revenge. The man who saved the protagonist earlier says that his life was put at risk because of it, and if he leaves the clan, it will be disgraceful. Li Zhang, the elder, then asks what he suggests. Become a Jiming disciple, the man says, stating that if after a few years he is not capable of becoming a Shoshin, they can judge him. The elder thinks for a moment about this, and decides to accept the suggestion. The other, who does not agree with this, tries to argue with Li Zhang, but the elder says that's enough and that he has made his decision, so he should say no more. The savior is pleased with the decision. Taiju now knows everything. Even though it doesn't sound great, at least listening is a good start, says the sect member. The protagonist agrees with him. With that, Zhang Shixiong tells the boy to rest a bit before they register his name. Taiju thanks him for that, and he says there's no need to thank him, as he didn't do anything. After that, the protagonist thinks that the road ahead will be difficult, but he is happy because he finally managed to enter the Hengyu sect. Upon arriving at the place, a member asks the protagonist if he is Wang Li, who returned as a disciple after attempting suicide. The protagonist doesn't like his attitude. The member also says that starting tomorrow morning, Taiju's job will be to carry water every day, and if he can't carry the jug, he won't be allowed to eat. He also shows him the clothes that the protagonist will have to wear from now on. He concludes by saying that, with his identification, the others will take him to his new home. Taiju leaves and outside sees another sect member, who says he must truly be cursed for showing the way to trash. Upon arriving at his quarters, Taiju thinks that the people here are really annoying. Then he feels an unpleasant aura near him, and soon sees that it's another member. Noticing that the man is worn out, he asks why that is. But no one responds, and the man just lies down on his bed. The protagonist doesn't like this very much, and asks the man if he is okay. The man says he is hungry, and Taiju offers him a sweet potato. As soon as he sees the sweet potato, he quickly gets up from the bed and grabs it fast. Taiju tells him to take it easy, as there's plenty more. The man thanks him and says he feels revived after eating. He then introduces himself as Zhang Fu and asks the protagonist's name. Taiju, he replies. Soon Zhang says that he is the boy who entered after attempting suicide. But Taiju gets upset, as he knows that's not true. Zhang then apologizes and says it slipped out. Taiju says that he seems very tired and asks what happened. Zhang replies that it has been 3 days since he last ate anything, and during that time, he was chopping wood. He asks what the protagonist's task is. Taiju responds that he has to carry 10 large jars of water. Upon hearing this, Zhang can't believe it. The protagonist asks what's so bad about his task. Zhang asks if he thinks the jar is the same as the one he has at home. Taiju replies that he does, and Zhang quickly corrects him, saying that the large water jars here are much bigger than what the protagonist knows. Taiju soon becomes angry, because this task was assigned specifically to him. However, he refuses to give up. As soon as his task begins, he goes to a river to fill the jars. Taiju finds the place quite beautiful, but regrets not having time to appreciate the details. The boy climbs some steps, holding the water bucket. Then he decides to rest for a while, feeling somewhat relieved from his pains. Soon someone appears and says they've met again. This startles the protagonist, because he doesn't know who it is. But he soon sees that the voice belongs to a girl who apologizes for scaring him. Taiju asks if they've met before. She replies that they have, but she was unconscious, and perhaps he doesn't remember. The protagonist asks when that happened, as it seems he has fainted many times. The girl just hands him something. He takes it and thanks her. Soon he realizes it's a fruit. After that, she says goodbye and leaves. Taiju tries to ask her to see him again, but he was so captivated that he couldn't. He then realizes he forgot to ask her name. However, when he looks, she's already far away. Taiju feels frustrated for having forgotten. He then stores the girl's gift. And with that, he notices he had also kept the tiger stone. Before using it, he makes sure no one is watching, and puts the sphere in the water bucket. Then he uses the water to wash his face. Noticing that afterward, he doesn't feel tired anymore. Quickly, he thinks about using it to speed up his task. Now Taiju no longer feels afraid to keep working. The next day, while carrying out his task, he sees a gourd in the shape of a bottle. Soon, he uses it to store water, and drink when he feels tired. This strategy proves to be very useful, as Taiju quickly managed to finish, and in no time, filled the 10 large jars of water. Afterward, he returns to the stream, and decides to bathe in it. The water there is quite comfortable, but out of nowhere, he notices some bubbles coming from the water, and he wakes up in the middle of the night, realizing he had been dreaming. The situation becomes even more unpleasant. When Taiju realizes he is pressed, due to all the water he drank during the day, he sees his blankets soaked, and wonders if he did this himself. However, he concludes that it wouldn't be possible. Looking at his roommates, he realizes something is wrong. A strong rain falls outside, and someone, observing from afar, asks why there is such strong lingqi in the Jiming disciples' dormitories. Taiju wonders what is happening. When he looks at his roommate, he sees that he is in agony. The protagonist asks if Zhang is okay. Zhang's body is burning up, and Taiju wonders what to do, but soon he remembers the stone, which might help. He then grabs the item. However, when he sees the stone, he notices something strange is happening with it. Taiju doesn't know what to do, as the stone is emanating energy. Soon he decides to throw it far away, and he doesn't know what will happen next. However, After getting rid of the stone, he realizes that the mist there has disappeared. Taiju realizes that the phenomenon he witnessed was caused by the item. He tries to retrieve the sphere, but when he holds it, nothing happens. He remembers that there were 6 clouds on the stone, but now there are 7. He quickly wonders if he did something wrong. After that, he remembers Zhang, and goes back to him, noticing that his roommate is trembling. Taiju then decides to get some water, but the container is empty. The protagonist remembers filling the teapot with water, and blames the stone for its disappearance. He looks out the window and notices that it's raining outside. Concluding that the rainwater might be enough, he goes to fetch some, bringing some for his roommate to drink. For Taiju, this was all quite frightening. He tries to deduce the cause, wondering if it's because his luck is high and this came to balance it out, or maybe because he bathed in the river and drank the gourd's water. So he decides to test the bath theory first. In the middle of the rain, he went outside, and he looked for a place in the middle of the forest, wearing improvised clothing for protection against the rain. Taiju digs a hole in the ground to hide the stone. Because of the confusion, he decides to do this. He buries the stone at the location, thinking he will retrieve it in a few days. After that, he decides to return. But someone sees him walking in the shadows. Seeing the protagonist in the rain makes him think he found who he was looking for. However, a lightning bolt strikes the area and hits precisely the umbrella he was holding. In the morning, after the rain has passed, the protagonist is calmer and is having his breakfast. While doing this, he remembers the kind girl. This makes him quite happy. Beside him, John wakes up, noticing that the protagonist seems different. Taiju is radiating happiness. John feels full of energy himself. The protagonist says it must be because he slept well. His friend asks if Taiju doesn't have to carry water today, but he replies that he already did everything. John doesn't believe it and asks if he finished everything after just 4 days. Taiju replies that yes, it's all thanks to his incredible strength. He also has a question to ask, and his friend says he can go ahead. Thinking about the girl, Taiju asks what colors a disciple's uniform has. His friend thinks for a moment, and says that starting from the lowest rank, gymming disciple, they are divided between red and yellow, representing that they have earned the right to be a Xian. The official disciples are divided between red and white, purple and black. John says that people with black marks are the strongest, and the chance to meet them is very slim. Taiju then asks how they will advance in rank. His friend says that if you are a gymming disciple, the first thing you must do is complete tasks for 10 years, which can be done on the same day they are given. This time frame scares the protagonist, and he asks if there isn't another way. Maybe, replies Zhang, saying that only if you could catch the attention of one of the elders and become one of their disciples, but this opportunity is very rare. Frustrated, Taiju sighs in disappointment. Zhang says they should just work hard to complete all the tasks. The protagonist has one more question and asks who Ling Zhen and Tianzi are. His friend thinks for a moment, and says it's like planting a seed, but inside your body. You have to practice to slowly turn it into a tree, and this tree is called Lingqi. Some are born with a Ling Zhen and are known as Tianzi. He also says he heard that Ling Zhen can be implanted, but how exactly, he's not sure. Taiju asks if he has more to say, but notices that his friend has a book where everything he just said is written. Zhang says he got the book from Jiao Yihui. The protagonist doesn't know who that is, but Zhang says he will know soon enough. When Taiju reads the book, he becomes more interested. The information pleases him greatly. Zhang notices that his friend liked the book, and says the protagonist is free to read it, as he's going to work. But before leaving the room, a man in red and black robes appears. Zhang apologizes to Sun Zhonglao for his disciple not greeting him earlier. Taiju stops reading and notices the man. Sun Zhonglao asks the protagonist if he is Wang Lin. Outside, the others wonder why Sun Zhonglao is looking for someone as useless as the protagonist, and conclude that it must be something bad. Sun Zhonglao asks the boy if he was the one who filled all the jars. He simply replies that yes, it was him. Sun Zhonglao says he did an excellent job, and the protagonist thanks him. Soon, Sun Zhonglao tells the boy to come to his mansion later, as he will be rewarded. With this invitation, the protagonist feels happy. After that, the man leaves, and Zhang comments that the protagonist is already catching the attention of a powerful elder. But Taiju says his friend is wrong. He says the man didn't even bother with his friend, and he is underestimating the gymming disciples. It couldn't have been because of his hard work. It would be far more suspicious if he came just for that, and there must be another intention. Zhang asks if his friend isn't overthinking this, because they are gymming disciples, and what would Zhonglao gain by deceiving them? Taiju says he'll wait and see and think about what Zhonglao wants. He thinks it could be because of the strange phenomenon from last night, but whatever it is, it has definitely just become interesting for him. Taiju wonders if the man's visit to his room is due to what happened the day before, as there were 2 people in the room, yet he received all the attention. But he soon concludes that, for the man to have come, it means he still doesn't know about the stone. He then considers it might be because of the gourd. A practitioner could easily see what's inside this gourd. It seems to Tai Zhu that he can't hide it any longer and must face him. Later, at Sun Zhonglau's mansion, Tai Zhu goes to the location as the man requested. Soon, he is startled by something. Seriously, Sun Zhonglao asks the protagonist what it is. Tai Zhu realizes the man can see through everything. He doesn't know how to respond, but immediately, Sun Zhonglao uses his abilities and pulls the gourd from the protagonist. Upon grabbing the item, he examines it. The boy still doesn't understand how the man did that. Sun Zhonglao looks carefully at the gourd and asks the protagonist what it is. Tai Zhu thinks he needs to regain his composure and replies that the item is a gourd that stores water from a mountain river. Additionally, the water is incredible, as he drinks it whenever he feels tired and immediately feels better. He also says he's heard that all things from the saints are good, but he didn't expect the water to be so amazing. He adds that if Sun Zhonglao wants to taste the water, he still has 10 jars full of it, as large as this house. Sun Zhonglao asks where he found the gourd. The protagonist thinks the man is showing his true intentions while no one is around, calling him a hypocrite for that. But he decides to answer, saying he found the gourd while fetching water, and asks if there's any problem with it. Sun Zhonglao thinks that this gourd is very dense. An ordinary being cannot absorb it, but it can indeed refresh. So, the boy is not lying. However, leaving it with the protagonist would be a huge waste. If used by the Liandan, the effect would be significant. The strange phenomenon last night must have caused this. After reaching this conclusion, Sun Zhonglao asks the protagonist how he dares, saying that the boy is trying to deceive a superior, and it seems he no longer wants to stay in the Hanyu clan. Tai Zhu says everything he's saying is true. However, Sun Zhonglao doesn't believe him and says the boy is treating him like a fool, as just by looking at it, one can tell the gourd was recently stolen. But the protagonist said he found it in the lake. Sun Zhonglao says he will give the boy another chance and asks again where he got the item, insisting that he be honest, or he will be expelled from the clan. Angry, Tai Zhu says he can do that if he doesn't believe his words, claiming that all he did was carry water every day and didn't do anything else. He adds that he hasn't been able to eat for days because he's been filling the jars, and if it weren't for the sweet potatoes he brought from home, he would have starved by now. So, this isn't Xiuxian, it's just torture. He concludes by saying it was very difficult to bring this gourd from the lake, and if the man wants it so badly, why doesn't he just take it, instead of insisting that he stole it? In his mind, Sun Zhonglao thinks he wants the item, but if he steals from a disciple and someone finds out, it would ruin his image. Also, since the boy says nothing, this gourd is not unique. So, he thinks it's best to resolve this situation, saying he misjudged the boy. He also says that not eating for days must have been hard. He claims he didn't know, but now that he does, he will take care of the protagonist, and he can leave the gourd there. Sun Zhonglao says he hasn't treated him badly, and asks if the boy would like to be his Tongzi. The protagonist says that Tongzi means servant, and if his parents find out, they won't like it. With the refusal, Sun Zhonglao becomes furious, but he thinks he needs to calm down. Then, he says that instead, the boy can be his disciple. This proposal pleases the protagonist more. So, Sun Zhonglao agrees and says he will keep his word, giving him a reward. The boy asks what it is. Sun Zhonglao responds that it is a Feng Xing talisman. Tai Zhu asks what the talisman is for. The man tells him to put it on his leg and find out. Then he sticks the paper to the boy's leg, but the protagonist says he doesn't feel anything different. Sun Zhonglao tells him to try running and jumping. Tai Zhu goes outside. Now the man tells him to test it, so the boy decides he will do it. He then prepares to run. Gaining momentum, he dashes forward quickly. His acceleration increased thanks to the item. Immediately, he realizes that it really works. Then, he performs a jump, and manages to leap over a high wall. The happiness on his face is genuine. In contrast, the expression on Sun Zhonglao's face is not pleasant at all. Later, in a forest, Zhang is doing his job of chopping wood. He hears the protagonist's story and understands why Sun Zhonglao called him to his house. He also says that he's been chopping wood for a long time and hasn't seen results. But the protagonist, just by filling 10 jars, has already become a disciple. Tai Zhu says he's not sure if that's a good thing, but his friend says that obviously it's a good thing. After all, that's the reason everyone is there, to become an official disciple and start their journey to becoming a saint. The protagonist thinks about it for a while, and remembers how his family motivated him to become a saint and make them proud. That's the real reason for the protagonist. He then understands this more clearly. Before leaving, he gives a bag to his friend. Zhang asks what it is. Tai replies that it's sweet potatoes. Soon, he says goodbye and leaves. His friend tells him to wait a bit. Before leaving, Zhang tells him to do his best, and the protagonist says the same to him. Then Taiju says goodbye and tells him he'll be waiting for his friend. Later, in another place, the protagonist is happy to have finally gotten his own house. He then looks at an item he received half an hour ago. Sun Zhonglao said that the bag is for keeping important things, and that inside it is what he'll need, also mentioning that his house is to the east. In the present moment, Taiju decides to open the bag to check its contents. But when he does, he's surprised, as he wonders how such a small bag can hold so many things. Among everything, one specific item catches his attention. A book that seems to be important. Its title is Ningqiu San Pian. Thus, the protagonist concludes that the path to becoming a saint has finally arrived. In another moment, the protagonist is using his abilities to control stones. His expression is one of dissatisfaction. He is facing a villain, who is holding hostage the girl he likes. Taiju tries to intimidate the villain and demands that he release the girl. But the villain mocks him, pointing out that he doesn't even know her name. And yet, he's still trying to save her. Furious, Taiju yells at the villain to release the girl. However, in a cruel manner, the villain only laughs at the protagonist, saying afterward that if Taiju has what he needs, he should hurry up to save her. With that, the protagonist uses all his strength to fight him. However, with his hands raised to the sky, he wakes up and realizes it was just a dream. Even though it was very realistic, none of it actually happened. Taiju attributes it to luck, as he didn't have to go through it in reality. This makes him a bit happy. Then he gets up for another day, and puts on his new clothes. Now he's wearing the colors of an apprentice, and still can't believe he's really become an official disciple. Ready for another day, he decides to start his studies, and picks up the book his master gave him. The protagonist sits in a meditation pose. With that, he breathes in and out, chanting his mantra, so he can learn more about the path to Tuna and Ichang, Sanduan. Ichang is the moment of inhalation, Sanduan is the moment of exhalation, and the time is 1/3 of Ichang. This natural breathing method is the fastest way to absorb Lingqi into the body, but the protagonist feels strange, just like the night before, as he doesn't feel any difference, attributing it to the exhaustion of the previous night, or perhaps to the place where he is now. Considering this last possibility as the cause of his problem, he decides to go to the lake, thinking it might be a more suitable place for meditation. So he does, and walks to the spot. On the way, he smells a pleasant scent, and notices that it's coming from the plants his master planted. Wondering if this helps with meditation, since they were planted by a saint, Taiju decides to try meditating there. With that, he sits down in the place, and focuses to begin. Soon, he enters his meditative state. Then he is overcome by a feeling, and wonders if it's his body absorbing Lingqi. But he feels as if there is an insect crawling inside his body. However, his meditation exercise is interrupted. His master appears, calling him insolent. He observes the master at the place, and remembers that he looks very similar to the villain from his dream. Sun Zhonglao asks who gave him permission to meditate there. He also asks, if all these precious herbs died after the boy absorbed their Lingqi, would he be able to take responsibility? The protagonist says he didn't know, and tries to apologize to the master. Sun Zhonglao says that, even so, the boy is not allowed there. If he brings another gourd to the master, he will be given another low-level linkshare to use. With this, the protagonist becomes happier. The master still states that if he brings another gourd, he will give him a low-level linkshare. Taiju says he was actually heading toward the lake, and if he's lucky, he might find another gourd. His master tells him to hurry. After that, the protagonist heads toward the lake. On the way, he whistles a tune, and the sound echoes through the trees, but without realizing it, he is being followed. His master stays hidden in the trees, watching him from afar, thinking the boy is hiding something he needs to know to get the gourd. The boy, meanwhile, seems lost. His master notices something is wrong, and thinks the boy is wasting his time. Taiju decides to head back. However, when he looks at the ground, he notices there are more footprints than there should be, and concludes that his master is indeed spying on him. Taiju thinks that his master wants to play a game, so he decides that he will play along. Shortly after, he arrives at the lake, and comments that the air there is so calm and perfect for meditation. He then assumes a meditation posture. From afar, his master observes him and sees that the boy is still waiting. He concludes that he will give him some time. At noon, the boy finishes, and as he thought, it's not the same as meditating in the herb garden, but it works here too. He stands up and realizes that he has improved a bit, but his feet are numb from staying in the same position for so long. Sun Zhonglao had been watching him the entire time, and thinks it was inevitable for his legs to become numb from sitting there so long. Then he notices that the boy is heading toward the woods and decides to follow him, but realizes that his own legs are also numb. The protagonist walks calmly through the forest. When he comes across something of interest, he sees a tree full of pumpkins, and finds one that could serve as a gourd. Not far away, Sun Zhonglao sees that the boy indeed took a pumpkin from the tree. After that, the boy returns home and tells his master that he couldn't find any gourds, but he was quite lucky, because he found many of them while walking around the mountain. Taishu hands the one he found to the master and asks what he thinks, as this one seems better than the last. Sun Zhonglao says that what he needs is not in this gourd, but in a gourd with Lingqi. The boy asks what's wrong with the gourd he brought, but irritated, the master doesn't answer. He thinks the boy made him waste his entire day, as he followed him around, and in the end made him look like a fool, because he came back with just some pumpkins. The protagonist asks the master what Lingqi is, as all he heard was that the master wanted a gourd and that he would be rewarded with a lincture. Sun Zhonglao thinks that only after reaching the first level of Qixing will the boy be able to sense the Lingqi of heaven and earth. He wonders whether the boy is being truthful or not. In any case, he keeps his word and gives the boy the lincture he promised. He tells him to hurry up and advance his Xiulian to the first Qixing. Now that the boy can go, he thanks the master and leaves the place. Sun Zhonglao doesn't care if the boy is an idiot or not, as long as he doesn't honestly hand over the gourd that he so desires. He personally says that he will take care of the protagonist, and as soon as he reaches the first level, he will make him taste the Sohun Shu. Sohun Shu is a simple holy method, but because of this, it has some restrictions. It cannot be used by a common being before the pill production phase, so there will be another side effect. Besides being very flexible, after taking Sohun, most die and their souls scatter. The best result is that someone becomes a fool for the rest of their life. However, this restriction does not apply to the practitioner, but it can only be used a maximum of 3 times in a lifetime, and each use will cause both progress and regression. While the protagonist was meditating peacefully, the master prepared one of those medicines and gave it to him to drink. Taishu asks what it is. The master says it's a medicine to help him meditate, and it will help him reach the first level faster. Hearing this makes the protagonist excited. He then drinks the medicine. Right after, he feels a reaction in his body. He feels a strong burning sensation in his chest, and asks the master what is happening. As soon as he finishes speaking, the master extends his hand and places it directly where the boy said he felt the pain. Taizhu doesn't understand what is happening, but the master says he will help him absorb it. He instructs the boy to stop talking and start focusing, so the protagonist does, obeying his master. Sun Zhonglao thinks he has made a big investment in him, and now he wants the boy to repay him in the future. Both focus together, after all. However, the boy feels something strange. His master tells him to concentrate, as there is still no trace of Lingqi entering his body. Taizhu says he has been trying to improve his focus, but nothing seems to be happening. Because of this, his master calls him incompetent. He then moves away from the boy, and asks if he's alright now, but the protagonist shows no reaction. Soon, Sun Zhonglao calls him useless trash. Taizhu watches his master leave the room. He's still tired from the exercise. After the master leaves, he lies down to rest, and thinks that pretending to concentrate is certainly exhausting. But for now, he knows for sure that the old man is plotting something. The protagonist wonders why the master is so eager for him to reach the first level so quickly, saying that he won't let the master do things his own way. After this, Taizhu leaves, and outside the master's house, he says he's going to the river to circulate his qi and see if he can make any progress. The master hears what he says, and it piques his curiosity. Sun Zhonglao thinks that he has trained the boy for an entire month, giving him the best medicine he has, yet the boy still has no results. Night falls, and with it comes a heavy rain accompanied by thunder. Inside the house, the master thinks. He tries to guess the mysteries that surround his disciple's mind, and he thinks that even if he poured the water from the source into the gourd now, there wouldn't be any Lingqi left. It seems that this gourd is ordinary by nature, but due to some strange event, the boy was able to hold it, and he must have obtained it by chance because trash like him wouldn't have such a capability. Sun Zhonglao still says that the chance of the boy finding another gourd is slim. This is not good for him. Angry, he throws the objects from his table, breaking them as they fall to the ground. Sun Zhonglao notes that he has wasted a lot of time with this trash, and now concludes that he will have to kill him. Outside, the rain becomes more intense. The protagonist sleeps in his bed. With that, he has a dream that he has finally reached the first level. But before he can celebrate, a sinister shadow appears, leaving him very frightened. The fright is enough to wake him up, and he realizes it was just another nightmare. However, upon opening his eyes, he senses a presence. When he looks to his side, he sees the master staring at him up close. The protagonist tries to get up, but Sun Zhonglao grabs him by the neck. Taizhu doesn't understand what's happening, and asks the master if he did something wrong. However, the master just stares at him coldly, making the protagonist conclude that the master really wants to kill him. He thinks that if Sun Zhonglao kills trash like him, he will be able to face the others if this is ever discovered. Losing his breath, Taizhu is in his final moments, and he thinks that if this continues he won't survive. For him, death is not an option. So, he concludes that he must tell the master about the stone. But before he can do that, the master releases him, and says that killing trash like him will only bring a bad reputation to himself. He adds that just looking at the boy makes him angry. Hearing this makes the protagonist very sad. Son Zhonglao tells him to leave his mansion and never appear in front of him again. He concludes by saying that without the gourd, the boy is nothing. After this, the protagonist is thrown outside. This act makes him think that it's true what they say. Someone weaker than others. Trash who tried to kill himself. A boy who isn't a descendant of anyone important, just like a homeless person. Irritated, Taizhu tells everyone to wait. He gets up from the ground, and thinks that he cannot cry. Lightning strikes around him, and he concludes that now is not the time to lament. After being expelled from the main mansion by the master, the protagonist is now living in a remote area. Despite being kicked out to him, this doesn't mean something bad. While walking around his new home, someone calls him from afar. Taishu turns to see who it is, and realizes it's his friend Zhang Fu, who hasn't seen him for a while. His friend says that since his departure, that yellow squirrel took over his bed and said the place brings good luck. What annoys Zhang is having to see his face every day, and on top of that, he keeps giving orders. Taishu asks, "What squirrel is that?" His friend replies that it's that weird guy who wears a yellow outfit, the one who gives tasks to the gymming disciples. With this description, the protagonist remembers and comments that he really does have the face of a squirrel. Then, he apologizes to his friend for having brought him into this. Zhang Fu says that's unnecessary, as his friend is not to blame. But anyway, he asks how he's been doing lately. Taizhu replies that he's going to get Liandan. Each disciple is allowed to get one on the 10th day of the month. His friend says that's great because he can get benefits without needing to work. Joking aside, he notices something wrong with the protagonist and asks what happened. However, Taizhu dodges the question and says his friend is overthinking things. Soon, he stands up and says it's already late, so he'll go ahead and visit Zhang when he has time. Zhang agrees and says he'll see him again. But in his thoughts, he realizes that something must have gone wrong, because his friend's eyes have become much more distant. After leaving, the protagonist walks to a temple. Upon arriving there, he notices something different. Looking at the door of the place, he sees several shoes at the entrance, and removes his own before entering. Now barefoot, he enters the place, and hears someone say to Zhou Shuji that his master made him stay isolated for 3 months in Xiulian to reach the first level. But all he could think about was the girl, so he couldn't stay focused. But last night, he finally reached the first level. The boy says he tried really hard last night to pick some flowers because he thought they were beautiful, and asks if the girl liked them. As he approaches, the protagonist recognizes Wang Zhou, but upon hearing the girl's voice, he realizes he's heard it before, and remembers the day he met her while carrying water. He looks at her face, still incredulous, because he didn't expect to find her there. However, when he saw her, there were no more doubts. Zhou Shiji says that the flower he received is definitely a Ming Rishiang. They can be found everywhere on the mountain, so how can he say he worked hard? Caught in the lie, Wang Zhou feels embarrassed. Soon, he notices the protagonist is there. Wang Zhou asks if he shouldn't be at home with his father becoming a craftsman, instead of being there. However, the protagonist completely ignores him. The girl asks Wang Zhou if they know each other, as she says the protagonist is famous in the Hengyu sect, but Wang Zhou didn't know that. One of the students says he couldn't know that since he was isolated for several months. He also says that the protagonist joined the sect after attempting suicide, and through his smooth talking, he was able to become Sun Shushu's disciple, thus making his story known throughout the sect. Now that he knows, Wang Zhou comments that it's shameful, but the girl says they've gone too far. Wang Zhou tells the protagonist that it's not because he knows him, but that pretty words are dirty, and he's intrigued by the way he managed to enter the sect, stating that, with his talent, he will never be able to reach the first level in his lifetime. Irritated, the protagonist says that his affairs are none of anyone's concern, but the meddler seems pleased to have angered him. The girl, in turn, says that its true talent is important, but besides that, it takes perseverance. Then anything can happen. Xiuxian is by nature against the will of God. Wang Zhou is surprised that the girl defended the protagonist, and soon gets irritated by this and looks down on the protagonist, saying it would be better for everyone if the protagonist returned to his useless, precious father and became a craftsman. Upon hearing this, Taizhu becomes very angry, and he simply tells Wang Zhou to apologize. Wang Zhou pretends not to understand, but the protagonist insists that he apologize. However, Wang Zhou says he did nothing wrong, stating that he heard from his father that the protagonist's father is good with words. He also tells the protagonist that his father isn't the only one who wants to divide the property. Wang Zhou claims that even so, his father was insulted in every possible way. Fortunately, the other relatives were strong and helped his father get his properties back. He further states that calling the protagonist useless is still being kind. Before saying more insults, Tai-Shu completely loses his temper and moves to attack the spoiled boy. Seeing that he's about to be punched, Wanzhou becomes scared, and Tai-Shu tells him it's better to shut his mouth. Then, he punches the spoiled boy hard. Zhou Shiji is shocked because she had never seen this aggressive side of the protagonist. The others are also startled, and Wanzhou's face feels hot after being hit. The protagonist says that Wanzhou's father was unfair to his family, joining with other relatives to steal their properties, leaving his family with nothing. And besides insulting his father, Wanzhou is also telling a bunch of lies. But Wanzhou says he's not a liar. He adds that, like father, like son. Then, outraged, he tries to fight back. The protagonist didn't expect this, and gets punched as well. Seeing the fight, the other students try to separate them, saying that it's enough. The girl tells the protagonist that he needs to stop, as he might end up getting expelled from the sect. The older student also tries to calm Wanzhou down. After this commotion, someone approaches where the students are, and asks what's happening there to cause so much noise. When the protagonist sees who appeared, he is surprised. Wanzhou is also quite shocked. The person approaching looks at the others. He asks what is going on, and quickly, the protagonist recognizes Wanhao. Wanzhou also recognizes him, and isn't pleased at all. Hao says the liandan is not ready yet, so they must wait, as he will call them one by one each time the master finishes mixing the liandan. His presence doesn't please Wanzhou at all, and Hao notices his dissatisfaction, saying that the annoying Wanzhou is there. But as soon as he sees the protagonist, he is happy to have met him again. Taizhu is also happy to see him. Quickly, Hao jumps toward him, and pulls him aside. He asks what happened to the protagonist's face. Even though he's still furious, looking at Wanzhou, he says it's nothing. Wanzhou asks what the protagonist is looking at and if he wants another fight. However, Hao tells the protagonist not to pay attention to them, and instead says they will teach them a lesson as soon as he learns the holy art. Then, he congratulates the protagonist on becoming an official disciple, and says he has heard all the stories about him. At first, Hao was looking for the protagonist, but the sect is strictly controlling everyone, making it difficult to leave. Finally, Hao tells the protagonist to ignore other people's bad words, and Taizhu thanks him for the kind gesture. Hao says that earlier, he was trying to say a few words, but his father keeps watching him, telling him not to get into trouble. Taizhu says he doesn't need to mention the past. All he thinks about now is the famous Xiulian. Hao also says he has something for the protagonist, and hands him a few spheres. The master calls Hao back. Before leaving, he gives the items to the protagonist and leaves. While Taizhu stores the gift, Wanzhou watches with envy. He didn't like seeing Hao again at all. Next, he goes up to the protagonist, and says he will remember that punch. But Taizhu doesn't back down, saying that he better remember it. The girls present become worried. Soon, the day comes to an end, and they wait for the master's arrival. After a while, Hao returns. Angry, Wanzhou says that he finally decided to show up. Hao tells them to prepare to go when called. Wanzhou thinks that whether he believes it or not, he will cut the protagonist into pieces. The protagonist grabs one of the packages Hao brought, and sees that it contains more of the spheres, the same as the ones Hao gave him earlier. He looks at Hao from afar, and receives a wink in return. Thus, he understands what he must do and simply greets him back. Wanzhou finds only a folded piece of paper inside his sack. When he opens and reads it, he gets irritated, because he knows that Hao wrote it. The paper said that Hao took all the items from his nose, and Wanzhou should eat them if he dares. Night falls for them, and the protagonist has already returned to his cabin. He decides to go out for a bit, and walks around where he lives. The protagonist reaches a place, but notices something different. He wonders what happened there, because all the plants around wilted all at once. Taishu gets worried about the sphere, and digs at the spot where he buried it. When he finds the item, he sighs in relief that it's still there. Then he takes the sphere again, but he has a strange feeling, as if he's being watched from afar. Frightened, he tries to look around, trying to spot something, and wonders if he saw or heard an illusion. However, he decides that it doesn't matter now, and runs away from the place. Back at his cabin, the protagonist examines the sphere, and wonders if this could be the cause of that phenomenon. Upon checking more closely, he sees that there are more clouds at the top of the sphere. Taizhu remembers there were fewer clouds the last time. He thinks that, just like that night, the sphere produces more clouds. But now there's no more space at the top for any clouds. This might create a different effect if he perhaps submerges it in water, and he wonders if this is the final form of the pearl. The protagonist then decides to test this theory and fills a bucket with water, placing the pearl inside. But after drinking, he realizes it tastes like mud because he forgot to wash it. After drinking, he feels a little warm and no longer tired, but aside from that, nothing seems different. It seems that submerging the sphere in water made no difference. Taizhu picks up the pearl and examines it again. Then he decides to test something else. He quickly lights a candle and places the sphere over the flame. But even that has no effect. He puts the sphere on the table and stares at it for a while. Angry, he grabs a chair and tries to smash the sphere. But it doesn't break, instead sinking into the table. Realizing the sphere is intact, he understands that he was wrong again. Taizhu thinks that the pearl might have some kind of change. Staring at it on his table, he sighs. The sphere doesn't even move. In the end, the protagonist asks where the changes are. And tired, he ends up closing his eyes on the table. Taizhu doesn't want to sleep right now, and tries to stay awake a little longer. However, when he opens his eyes, the protagonist wonders where this place is because he realizes he's no longer at home. Around him, several lights turn on. Taizhu is very confused, and wonders where he is. He remembers being in his room. Now he thinks he might be dreaming, but he thinks he can't be dreaming, as he knows clearly what he was doing before he started to dream. However, the current place is unknown to him. Taizhu never thought he would be in such a strange place, and staring at the light, he thinks. As he gets closer, he tries to touch it, but when he tries to touch it, he feels pain in his hand. Soon he is back lying on his table, and wakes up in his room. In the midst of all this, Taizhu realizes that his hand hurts, and feels exactly the same as when he was dreaming. On his table, he sees the sphere, and notices that the clouds inside it have disappeared. Could it be that this was something the sphere did on its own? Taizhu remembers that he was looking at the item before falling asleep and starting to dream. The protagonist wonders if the sphere could be affected by reaching the 10 clouds. He feels like he should try something, so Taizhu closes his eyes, and when he opens them again, he realizes he has entered the same environment as before. Taizhu isn't sleepy and feels very energetic, just like when he drank the water infused with the marble. The water infused with the marble has spiritual aura. That place must be inside the sphere. Taizhu thinks that maybe the spiritual aura is even denser. The sound of birds, the sunlight passing through the leaves, takes him back to those days at home when he had no worries. That moment is the most peaceful instant Wang Lin has felt in recent days. Taizhu doesn't know how good the effects are, but he decides to try it. Soon Taizhu takes the meditation posture. The light of the place begins to move, heading toward the protagonist. In the form of luminous tentacles, these rays get closer, until they touch the protagonist. Taizhu absorbs this energy, and feels a tingling sensation as the spiritual aura enters his body. As expected, the aura is even denser there. The energy bends in the protagonist's favor. After doing this for a few hours, the protagonist feels that it's enough, as the breathing process is extremely tedious. But soon he remembers the confusion from earlier, and says that it won't work if he doesn't work harder than the others. However, he thinks he should leave first, remembering that the last time, he touched the light to exit. Taizhu stands up and heads toward the light, and tries to pass through it to return to reality. After that, he returns to his table, and realizes that he successfully came back. It seems that his body is strong enough, and he wonders if this could be the effect of the spiritual aura entering his body. Taizhu steps out of his cabin, and when he looks at the sky, he feels very good. However, while staring at the sky, Taizhu notices something different, and says that something is off, so he decides to run, heading straight to a location. Realizing that the area is different from what he knows, because this direction is east, and the sun is rising. Taizhu wonders what's going on, as his breathing session lasted for about 5 hours, so why is the sun rising now? He quickly tries to deduce what could have happened, saying that time inside the marble flows differently than normal daytime. Taizhu thinks about testing the time flow in the marble once again. He soon continues counting. Inside the marble, he carries out the process, and counts the time that passes there. However, soon he feels pain in his chest. It seems that this is the amount of time he can stay inside the sphere, about 18,000 minutes, close to 25 hours. But when he looks at his candle, he notices that the flame is still burning. Judging by the amount of oil, 3 hours haven't passed 10 times. Time flows 10 times slower inside the marble sphere than in reality. In other words, talent. This is the method that can defeat talent, a dense spiritual aura, 10 times for a given amount of time. Taizhu thinks that others want him to bow down, but he will follow his destiny, even if fate requires him to lift the world. He thinks it will be normal if he obeys, and he will become a saint. Numerous years have passed inside the marble sphere. Day and night continue in reality. The door to training to become a saint is about to open. Seeing this, Taizhu is a bit shocked, as he doesn't know what's coming. Inside the marble space, the protagonist slowly opens his eyes. After that, he is startled by something. In front of him, a large red door has appeared. He is scared, as the door wasn't there before. Taizhu is super confused, but he quickly concludes that he achieved this through his effort. A first-level chi condensation. First-level chi condensation is like a large door, and whoever opens it can enter the path to becoming a saint. Looking at his arm, Taiju sees a different aura. He thinks it could be a spiritual aura, which in itself seems very mysterious. The protagonist also senses a different smell, something like a foul odor. Soon, he looks down and realizes that the smell is coming from him. It was written in the third chi condensation book that, when someone suddenly passes the first level, they release a large amount of impurities from their body. After leaving and cleaning himself, the protagonist has already changed clothes, and washes his previous ones. Now that he is clean and feels lighter, he is satisfied because he has finally finished. Then, the next tasks are, to practice the arts of the saints. After washing his clothes, he goes near a waterfall, along with the book he is reading. Earth-splitting art, fireball art, attraction art. For the protagonist, it seems that only these 3 arts are recorded in the book. But for the protagonist, even so, this is not enough. Taiju tries to use the technique from the book, and concentrates all his strength on it. But he can't release anything with his hands. He then decides to read a little more of the book, while eating some fruits he found. Beside him, 2 animals eye his food. Taiju notices the 2, and decides to give them some of his food. Afterward, Taiju focuses on a stone, and tries the earth-splitting art first. With his hand on the stone, Taiju concentrates the spiritual power in the palm of his hand, feeling something different inside him. The protagonist tries to strike the stone, and after raising his hand, he notices that the stone cracked where he focused. Taiju is super happy with this, because he finally managed to use the saintly arts. Although he thinks this technique doesn't seem very useful, but it can still be used to deceive normal people. Turning the page in the book, Taiju decides to try the next technique, the fireball art. Such a technique seems incredible to him. The spiritual aura known as the gathering, the protagonist concentrates and commands the energy to come out. Although his fingers emit energy, nothing happens after he exerts himself. Soon, he tries again, and focuses on the spiritual aura. Once again, he shouts for the energy to come out. However, he is unable to use such a technique, and becomes extremely tired after practicing, thinking that he still lacks talent. To him, it seems like he can't practice this technique. The use of spiritual aura in it is much greater, but luckily, he still has the gourd. Only after reaching the first level did he realize there is a dense spiritual healing property in that water. It's no surprise that the old man wanted it so much. The next technique is the last one, the technique known as the art of attraction. This art allows for controlling some objects at a distance. This holy art seems quite decent. Taiju decides to test it with a stone. He tries to gather strength for it, and while using it on a stone, he notices that it moved. Soon, he is happy to have succeeded. Even though the effects aren't obvious, he can still manipulate it. And now he decides to focus on this art. With the same stone as before, he tries to manipulate it with the technique, thinking that mastering it will definitely be very useful. After condensing the chi, even his hearing improved. The birds become too loud for him. Nearby, the protagonist hears someone saying that, at first, his work would end after cutting 100 jean of wood. The protagonist recognizes the voice, belonging to his friend Zhang Fu. Inside the cabin, the squirrel-faced guy says that Zhang Fu hasn't finished his task on time every day. He also says that this amount of wood isn't enough to complete the task, yet Zhang dares to argue. Zhang Fu says that's a lie, as he delivered everything on time, as agreed. He adds that the squirrel was given a holy talisman, so he gave Zhao Gui the easier tasks. But Zhang Fu saw this, and now the squirrel-faced guy wants to force him out of the Hengyu sect. The squirrel-faced guy says Zhang Fu is forcing him to do this, because he saw what he shouldn't have, and if the elders find out, he'll wipe out Zhang Fu's entire family. Soon, the squirrel-faced guy grabs an axe and charges at him. The protagonist arrives in the middle of the commotion, and tells his friend to be careful while trying to use his newly acquired technique to help him. With the axe in hand, the squirrel-faced guy threatens Zhang. He says he's practically being forced to do this, blaming Zhang for seeing things he shouldn't have. He also tells Zhang to stay back, as the elders can't find out what he's going to do. Otherwise, he threatens to go after Shang's entire family. After that, the aggressor charges at the boy. With an axe, he intends to strike, and when he swings, Zhang tries to defend himself. However, the axe doesn't even hit him. The squirrel-faced guy doesn't understand what happened, as he can't move his body. Zhang, still scared, doesn't understand either. But when he looks back, he sees his friend, who has come to help. The protagonist asks if Zhang is okay, still holding the aggressor with his new ability. He tells Zhang to get out of there quickly, as he won't be able to hold him for long. Soon, the protagonist's strength starts to weaken. Noticing this, he becomes worried. Immediately, the squirrel-faced guy tries to attack Zhang again, but misses. Zhang dodged the attack and backed away. The squirrel-faced guy threatens the protagonist as well, and says that today, both of them will die. With his axe, he tries to strike Zhang once again, but at first, he misses. However, with the next strike, Zhang is hit. His face is wounded, and the protagonist becomes desperate. Taishu tells the aggressor to stop, then tries to use the art of attraction. However, he can't, as the ability isn't working. Meanwhile, his friend is lying on the ground with his face bleeding. The squirrel-faced guy is furious, trying to kill him. As he raises his axe as high as he can, he tries to finish the boy off once and for all. But the protagonist screams for him to stop. His anger becomes super intense, allowing him to summon his ability once again. When captured, the squirrel-faced guy is unsure how to react. And enraged, the protagonist grabs him and throws him against the wall. The impact is quite strong. Soon, Taizhu is satisfied to have helped his friend. Zhang is still lying on the ground with his face injured. Taizhu is worried about him and ends up releasing the aggressor. Zhang is now angry over what happened and gets up. The squirrel-faced guy begs to be released. Meanwhile, Zhang stands up and grabs the attacker's axe. He stands glaring at him. Seeing this scene doesn't sit well with the protagonist, and he asks what his friend is planning to do. Zhang just tells Taishu to leave, and with an angry look, he stares at his attacker. The attacker, now cornered, tries to reason with Zhang. Zhang simply says that if the squirrel face doesn't die, then he cannot live. Hearing the tone of Zhang's words makes the protagonist worried. The attacker tries to beg for his life, saying that if he dies, the protagonist will be an accomplice to murder. But before he can say more, Zhang rushes at him, making him utterly terrified. Even Taizhu becomes concerned, but Zhang's thirst for revenge is so great that nothing can stop him from getting it. With one strike, he ensures that the attacker will never speak another word, and the blood splatters on Zhang's face. In his last breath, the attacker screams in pain, and then immediately falls dead to the ground. Taizhu didn't expect his friend to do that, and he becomes worried about him. With his face covered in blood, Zhang asks if his friend saw what he did, and affirms that if he hadn't done it, he would be the one dead instead of the attacker. He also states that he was practically forced to do it. The current state of his friend makes the protagonist uneasy. Zhang, for his part, still has something he wants. He goes to the attacker's body, and takes a package from him, which was full of important documents and talismans. After taking what he wanted, he hands one of the talismans to the protagonist, saying that this is the talisman that caused all of this, and it must be a great treasure. If it weren't for this, that guy wouldn't have tried to kill him, and now he believes his friend should keep the item. But Taizhu says he doesn't want it. Seeing that his friend is shaken, Zhang says that it was Taizhu who saved him this time, and he should remember this kind act in his heart. After so many years in the sect, Taizhu is his only friend. He also says that he doesn't want to lose such a valuable friendship, and if the protagonist still wants his friendship, he should accept the talisman as a gift. Taishu tells his friend that he shouldn't blame himself for others' mistakes, but Zhang doesn't want to talk about it anymore. He says that if the sect investigates, they will only find him, suggesting that Taizhu should leave quickly. After that, Zhang says goodbye to his friend. Before leaving the place, Taizhu cleans up the blood. Then he takes the body far away, and disposes of it without anyone noticing, calling the attacker weak, saying that this is an appropriate end for him, because anyone can take their lives, and they won't be able to defend themselves. In this world, death is just the result that all the weak will face. Taizhu doesn't want to meet the same fate, because he will become a stronger saint than anyone. Determined, he practices his techniques, just like he used the stone before for the same goal. His focus and current objective are clearer than ever. Elsewhere, a student says that a gymming disciple has disappeared. The master knows that one is dead, and it seems there was a private fight between them. After killing the other, the disciple became afraid of punishment and fled. The student confirms this, saying that based on the initial analysis, the one who died was the disciple in yellow robes found at the bottom of a cliff, while the one who disappeared wore blue. With that, the master says that such a person is despicable, even after death, and the student should forget about it because they have more important things to worry about. A few months after these events, the protagonist, even under the snow, doesn't stop practicing his skills. They have evolved to the point where he can already control them better. He even uses them to turn snow into water, and he is now able to control the art of attraction, but it only works on small objects, perhaps because his condensed chi is still at the first level. For a moment, he remembers when he saved his friend, and wonders what really happened that night. But before thinking too much about it, his other friend appears, and Wang Hao greets him. Hao says that he spent a lot of time getting there and asks why the protagonist is living in such a remote area. He also says that Taishu hasn't gone to the pill room to get his medicine in a while, and gives him a supply that he saved. Taishu thanks him for the gift. Hao asks if he's heard about the trade fair. The protagonist isn't sure, but he thinks he has. Hao tells him that there will be a private trading fair for disciples within the sect today, and he heard they can acquire various items, asking if Taizhu is interested. Such a description piqued Taizhu's interest, and he says that maybe he can obtain the formula he needs to condense his chi to the second level, or even higher. Soon, he agrees to go to the location, and Hao offers to accompany him. The two head straight to the fair, and on the way, the protagonist notices something different. Hao explains that what he just ate is known as the Shua Xinghua Xing pill. After eating it, a layer of black mist covers his entire body. He adds that he managed to grab it when he was in the pill room. Others would need to use 2,000 wind walk talismans. Taiju comments that this way, others won't be able to recognize Hao, and he can stop worrying and trade whatever he wants. The protagonist then thanks and compliments Hao, who enjoys being flattered. Shortly after, they arrive at the location, and it seems that it hasn't started yet. Hao says he'll check out the types of stalls and items they have there. As they move around freely, they notice the place is very lively. Hao suggests the protagonist look at a normal item, which only costs a few talismans. However, Taiju only sees an old piece of metal, but when he picks up the item, he notices that it has a different temperature, and that this might not be as simple as it seems. He then asks the vendor how to trade for it. The vendor replies that the item costs 100 wind walk talismans. Taiju immediately thinks that he doesn't have that amount, but then he remembers Zhang's last gift. After pulling out the talisman package, he asks if this amount is enough. The vendor confirms that it is, and quickly makes the trade. Afterward, a loud alert is sounded, announcing to everyone present that the auction has started. The two friends get excited about it. However, from above, someone is watching them closely. The auctioneer announces that those with items to auction should come forward. One of the attendees starts with a flying sword, saying it costs 500 talismans. Someone from the crowd accepts the trade, and the auctioneer calls the next person. A man announces a single Zheohua pill and says those interested in trading should name their price. Several attendees make high offers. Taiju realizes that this item is really coveted. Another bidder offers an inferior jade talisman, a flying sword, 10 spirit seas pills, and 500 talismans. Hao also makes a bid of 230 spirit seas pills, and says that's his limit. If it goes higher than that, he won't trade. The auctioneer merely laughs at his offer, and thinks that the trade is unfair, saying he won't make the trade for less than 2,000 duoling dan. The protagonist thinks that this tone sounds familiar. The auctioneer then says no one will accept the trade and calls the next person. Taiju, in turn, presents his gourd and says that a single drop of the mysterious liquid inside is better than a duoling, and there are about 100 drops in it. He also says he would trade this for the formula to condense chi to the second level, or higher. After that, he opens the gourd, and everyone present is astonished. One person proposes to trade for a second to fourth level formula, but that's too little for the protagonist. Another offers a formula for the second to sixth level. However, the protagonist is direct, saying that he wants a formula from the third to the 10th level. Hao warns him that such a request could cause problems because, among the disciples, even the strongest can only condense up to the 6th level. And as for the formula he wants, only a few masters possess it. But then, someone says that if the protagonist has 200 drops of this liquid, he will give the formula from the 4th to the 9th level. Taishu tries to see who made the offer, and since the man isn't camouflaged, the others recognize him as Shixiong. He approaches and asks if the protagonist has the drops. Taiju notices that the man in front of him is surrounded by a dangerous aura, and replies that he accidentally obtained the liquid, and besides the 100 drops, he has kept a few dozen for his own use, so he doesn't have much more. After saying this, he waits for the bidder's reaction, and Shixiong says that's great and hands over the promised formula, demanding the liquid that the protagonist possesses. Taiju places the containers on the ground, and while staring at the buyer, he throws the items in his direction. Shixiong catches the 2 flasks, and says that if the protagonist is able to obtain that liquid again, he can find him at the bottom of the mountain. If it's about money or valuable items, he can pay. Hearing this leaves the protagonist a bit shocked. He quickly realizes that the others present also became excited by what they heard. The protagonist is startled by the proposal. He sees the others thinking that no matter who it is, as long as they have that liquid, they can trade it for goods. The others heard this and think the protagonist has more of the liquid, and such an item is valuable for trade. To avoid being cornered by the others, the protagonist leaps into the air. He then uses his ability, summoning his energy hand to escape. Taishu creates a snowstorm, and, through the art of attraction, he camouflages himself and escapes from there, with the others watching him, confused. With the mist he created, the protagonist manages to walk slowly, leaving the area without being noticed. For Taiju, in this kind of situation, running into the crowd is the safest option, but the vendor just now, with a single phrase, put him in a dangerous situation. Shixiong didn't know that the art of attraction could be used that way and finds the technique interesting. The others no longer know who the protagonist is, as he camouflaged himself again among them. In any case, the auctioneer says they will continue, Soon he shows a book containing the knowledge of an art that can temporarily hide someone's abilities. With this, no one could see the user's abilities unless they are at the Zhu-Ji stage. Some make offers, while others scoff at the item, saying it's useless because all Sect students want to show off their power, so something that hides it isn't interesting. But the protagonist doesn't think that way, so he decides to make an offer and wins the item. Back at his place, Taizhu is already flipping through the book he bought. Hao notices that he's already home. Strategically, Taizhu hides his book and tells his friend that he just got back. Hao asks if he managed to get any items, but the protagonist wants to be cautious and says no. Taizhu returns the question. Hao says that he really had bad luck because he thought he could trade for a Zhao Dan, but didn't expect someone to ask for 2,000 in return, which made him frustrated. The protagonist realizes that it was Hao who made the last offer. Even annoyed, he confirms that it was. Taizhu asks if that thing is really important to him. Hao tries to explain and asks if Taizhu knows what condenses the chi level of Wang Shou. The protagonist responds that he doesn't. His friend says that Zhou is currently at the peak of chi condensation at the first level. Taizhu is incredulous at this. He thinks that this evolution is very fast. He himself used the power of the marble to reach the peak of the first level of chi, and even then, it took him years within the sphere. Hao also says that Zhou's master spent a lot of money to buy a very precious medicine within the sect to speed up his training. Taizhu thinks that even so, it was incredibly fast. Dissatisfied, Hao says he doesn't want to lose to that guy. The protagonist asks Hao if he didn't feel that the voice of the guy selling the Zhao Dan was familiar. His friend responds that now that he mentioned it, it really did sound familiar. Soon Hao asks if it could be Wang Zhou in disguise. Taizhu responds that there's an 80% chance it's him. With that, Hao suddenly feels weak, but Taizhu tells him to cheer up, as his fourth uncle always said to never give up. As long as you're alive, there's still a chance to win. Those words motivate Hao. He says the protagonist's uncle is right, saying that there's always a chance to win as long as you don't give up, so he won't admit defeat. Taizhu is happy to have cheered up his friend. Hao says goodbye and tells him they need to meet again when they have time. The protagonist watches his friend leave, and now that he's alone, he decides to read his book again. He takes out the items he bought. Even feeling bad for lying to his friend, he's determined not to let anyone discover his true intentions. Taizhu then opens the scroll and begins reading the content. A few days after this event, some young people hear from the master about a training meeting. The master says that the sect leader ordered it. He also says that in 4 years, there will be a trading meeting with the Xiandao sect, so in 3 years, they will hold a training meeting. The old man says that in the past 100 years they have always lost, and even though this is just a rural gathering, it remains very shameful. He states that this time they need to win. He then instructs them to pass this message to every master and disciple inside the sect. His students immediately agree to obey. Far from there, some trees are covered in snow, and a leaf falls near him, but the protagonist catches it before it touches the ground. He uses it to improve his technique. Using his strength for momentum, he throws the leaf easily at a snow-covered mountain. The force applied is so great that not only is the leaf thrown, but also the pile of snow along with it. He achieved it as expected. After reaching the second level of chi condensation, he is now able to move even larger objects. His body no longer feels cold. Now he concludes that he should stop training and rest for a bit. So, he leaves and walks toward his cabin. However, upon getting close to the place, he senses someone's presence, and he identifies it as his former master. The protagonist sees his former master from afar, and is surprised by this. He tries to talk to the master, but doesn't like this situation at all. Inside his clothes, he hides the marble sphere. The master notices the object with him, and immediately uses his ability to pull it. Using the art of attraction, he pulls the protagonist entirely, and grabs him by the neck. Barely able to speak, the protagonist asks what he did wrong this time to deserve such treatment. The master just looks at him closely. Then, he lets him fall to the ground. The boy starts coughing because he was being suffocated. Sun Zhonglao simply says that he wanted to show the boy how easy it is to kill an insect like him, and that hiding something from him will result in death. Desperate, the protagonist says he would never dare, but the master is suspicious, and he examines the boy from head to toe, noticing that he only has spiritual power, and hasn't yet reached the first level of chi condensation. The amount of condensed chi at each level is different for each person, so the result varies, and the protagonist has temporarily managed to hide his strength and change the appearance of his chi condensation. Still anxious, Taizhu asks for permission, and inquires why the master came there. Sun Zhonglao says that there will be a martial arts gathering with the Xiandao sect in 4 years, and the sect has also ordered all inner disciples to train their martial skills. The protagonist feels relieved that the pearl wasn't discovered, and asks the master more about this Xiandao sect. The master says that with the boy's talent, he doesn't expect anything good to come from him. But if the boy ruins his reputation as a master, he will certainly not forgive him. He also tells the boy not to bother participating in the Sect's duels at the end of this year. There's no reason for it. Frustrated, the protagonist agrees with the master. Sun Zhonglao says the gathering will be after the new year, and he should remember that the sound of 5 chimes is the signal for him. And if the boy dares to be late, he will kill him. The protagonist once again agrees with the master, and after that, the old man leaves. The boy waits for him to completely leave, and after that, his eyes fill with rage, saying that the master is insane. When he's in a bad mood, he simply takes it out on his disciple. Then, the protagonist checks his pockets, realizing that the pearl is still there, and that his master still has no idea about it. The bag that holds it looks ordinary with a spiritual aura. A normal person cannot see what's inside. But surprisingly, the master can't see it either. In any case, he was almost discovered, far away, at Wan Lin's family home. The protagonist's father is sitting outside, when a noise catches his attention. He looks toward the gate of his house but sees nothing. Soon his wife appears and says that if he misses their son so much, he should wait for him at the house entrance. But even as he insists he doesn't, his wife knows him well. Now both of them hear a sound coming from the door. The boy shouts for his parents to open the door. His mother joyfully goes to greet him, and Tai Zhu is also very happy to see her. His mother says it's very cold and asks her son why he isn't wearing a coat. He replies that it's fine, and within the sect, there are many sacred arts that make the body resistant to cold. His mother is happy to hear that he already knows some sacred arts, and tells him not to stand there and come inside. When he enters the garden, he sees his father pretending not to be surprised. Tai Zhu greets his father, and he simply responds that the boy has returned. The protagonist confirms that he is back, and his father says that's good, while trying to hold back his tears. The father tries to hide it, and tells his son to wash up and get ready for the meal. He also says that later the uncle will arrive, and he will prepare some wine. His mother says that when the father found out about his son's return, he was very distracted. The protagonist is glad to know that his family still cares about him. He asks how his father's health is. The mother responds that it's the same, as when it starts to rain, his entire body begins to ache. The protagonist becomes even more worried about his father after hearing this. Meanwhile, a competition between inner disciples is taking place. Many of them are eager to participate. Among them is Wang Zhou. He looks to one side and sees some competitors. After turning to the other side, he sees the girls who are also there. One of them asks Wang Zhou if he's looking for someone specific, but he replies that he isn't. However, in his thoughts, he says that the protagonist really didn't participate. The competition begins and quickly heats up. One of the participants uses fire arts, and strikes his opponent with them. Upon being hit by the fire, the opponent is knocked out. The fire practitioner says it was a good fight, and the organizer calls the next one. Meanwhile, at the protagonist's house, they are setting up fireworks. Afterward, he greets his younger sister, and helps her decorate the outside of the house. After that, everyone sits at the table for the meal. Back at the disciple tournament, the winner of the duels between inner disciples is Zhang Dekun, and among the newcomers, the king of them is Wang Zhou. On the morning before the gathering, everyone hears the sound of 5 chimes, and they know what that means, the start of the competition among them. Automatically, they begin thinking about what to do, except for the protagonist, who will not participate in the competition, staying only in his imagination. The day of the training arrives, and everyone heads to the location, including the protagonist. He notices that the sect has many members in total. Upon arrival, he sees his master and bows to him, but the master pretends not to see him. The protagonist quickly feels embarrassed. However, he just waits, and soon the sect leader arrives and says it looks like everyone has arrived. He says that he wants everyone to know the reason for the training. Tai Zhu notices the leader and listens closely. The leader says that before the training begins, he would like everyone to know something. Those who train to become saints can be classified as those with abundant spiritual roots, and those with common spiritual roots. There are also those within the sect who have no spiritual roots. Upon hearing this, Wang Zhou says it's a disgrace. Sun Zhonglao is also ashamed, and soon glares at his disciple. Tai Zhu shrinks in embarrassment. The leader continues with his speech, and the protagonist tries to pay attention. The leader says that those with great talents naturally believe they are above others, but those with low talent are not destined to remain that way forever. Saints defy nature, walking the path of the supernatural, and what they do is a revolution against the heavens, and a rebellion against fate. Such words excite the others, except for the protagonist, who questions this in his mind. Highly agitated, the leader says that he doesn't care at all about the Xiandao sect, and his assistants try to calm him down. One of those present comments that the leader seems to truly hate the Xian sect. Wang Zhou, on the other hand, says that maybe it's easier said than done. The leader regains his composure and says that, Over the years, the Hangyu sect has always lost to its rivals, but they have never surrendered. Because they believe that victory will be theirs, as no one knows the future, precisely because it is created through their efforts. He also says that with the time they've had, their possibilities are not limited, and the key to all of this is perseverance. If others are more talented than them, then they must work a little harder than them. Those who are more talented cannot afford to relax too much, as they can be surpassed at any moment. During these 4 years of training, the leader expects everyone to train hard, surpass one another and themselves. This time, he believes that the Hangyu sect will prevail. All the students feel more motivated. The leader says that he hopes a group of purple disciples will emerge after this training. Then he orders them to go. Taizhu notices something different. The leader opens some kind of portal. A bright light emerges from the sky and heads toward the ground. The protagonist doesn't quite understand what just happened, but when he opens his eyes again, he realizes he has been teleported to another place. He sees that this is the back of the mountain and wonders why it's not snowing. However, before concluding anything, he notices Wang Zhou's presence, who calls him trash and says he shouldn't be there. He adds that it's better if he goes home, so he won't embarrass his family. Hearing this irritates the protagonist, but he tries to hold back. Wang Zhou says that after all this time, Taizhu still hasn't reached the first level of condensation, but even so, no one thought he wasn't qualified. One of Wang Zhou's friends says that not even he knows what he's capable of. However, angrily, Wang Zhou replies that this is a family matter, so his friend should keep quiet. After being scolded, the friend is surprised, but the protagonist says not to worry about it. Wang Zhou says it's simple. The protagonist should tell his father to break ties with the Wang family, and he'll pretend Taizhu is invisible. The tension between them rises even more. An older man tells the two of them to stop arguing, and that they should sit down and catch their breath. He turns to Zhou and asks if he's forgotten what the leader just said, but Wang Zhou's pride prevents him from admitting he's wrong. The protagonist then tells Zhang Xin, the older man, that he's already earned the black robes and congratulates him. Zhang Xin says it's all thanks to him. Taizhu doesn't quite understand, but Xin asks if he remembers the cave that traps people. He says the spiritual power is very dense there, and thanks to the protagonist, he was able to reach level 50, and Taizhu must give his best from now on to achieve the same. Taizhu says he thought that place wasn't so simple and also remembers the tiger, asking what happened to it. Xin replies that the dead animal was buried. The protagonist thinks that's good and, in a way, considers the tiger his savior. While he's thinking, Xin watches him, confused. Then, someone approaches and welcomes them to the back of the mountain. He also says that despite being called the back of the mountain, this place isn't behind the Hangyu sect. The protagonist quickly realizes he's seen this guy before, the mysterious buyer, Shi Xiong. He continues by saying that this place is actually a training ground made especially for the ancestors' disciples, nearly 500 years ago. The spiritual aura here far exceeds that of the outside. From the moment they enter, they must submit themselves at all times, or else they shouldn't blame him if they are expelled. Shi Xiong asks if everyone understands, and they all say yes. Then, he makes an invocation, and brings several bottles to the area. He says these are dual Lingdan bottles, and there are 50 of them, one for each student. Each one must step forward and take one. Shi Xiong says that regarding the 7th level of condensed chi or below, he has it if they reach that stage, and if they don't have the formula, they can obtain it from him. Regarding the training grounds, there are some caves that aren't closed off by the cliff rocks, and they can choose whichever they want. After that, the protagonist steps forward to take his bottle. Shi Xiong asks what his name is. He hesitates to answer the question. Then, Shi Xiong asks why he hasn't reached the first level yet, and also asks who his master is. The boy then introduces himself, and says that his master is Sun Zhanglao, and perhaps it's due to his lack of talent that he hasn't reached the first level. Shi Xiong says he's heard a lot about the protagonist, and that although talent is important, perseverance is also key to becoming a saint. He further states that if the protagonist's talent isn't strong, he must persevere even more. Taizhu thanks him for the advice and takes his bottle. Xiong says the wall of this cliff is very high, and since the protagonist hasn't even reached the first level, it's likely he won't be able to get up there. Then, he tells the boy not to worry about it, as he'll personally take him up. And with that, he uses his abilities to make the protagonist levitate to the top. With that strength and speed, he reaches the place without any difficulty. After landing inside one of the caves, Taizhu becomes suspicious of why he received so much help. From the top of the hill, the protagonist breathes, and realizes that the air there is practically filled with spiritual energy. If it weren't for the incident at the trade fair, he would really think Shi Xiong was a good person. A noise catches the protagonist's attention. He sees that it's a bird in its nest, and looking at the animal, he says that from today on, they will see each other quite often. The bird remains calm in its nest, while the protagonist decides to venture deeper into the cave. Taiju looks at the place, and thinks that it will be a great place to train. He also thinks that combining this with the marble will be like putting wings on a tiger. The dream room can stay open for about 25 hours at a time, and it takes 2 hours to enter it again. During that time, he can use the marble and the infused water. The effects should be very good. Soon he decides to start. He pulls a lever on the wall, and with that, the opening of the cave closes, and a rock seals the entire area. 2 years passed after that. The bird in the nest is now fully grown and flies around the area. Many of the caves now have students inside. Soon, the bird returns to its nest, taking advantage of the path that the protagonist has opened. He is now 2 years older and more experienced. As he walks to the edge of the cave, Taiju stretches a little. Afterward, he says good morning to the bird, and glances around for a bit. Right after that, he steps out from the cave, and although he steps into the air, he doesn't fall. Using the body manipulation technique, he can fly like a small bird. During these 2 years, besides practicing breathing techniques, he also trained his attraction skill, and now he can use it naturally. Upon safely landing on the ground, he spots a familiar face. It was Jo Shiji, who had also matured. She also recognizes the protagonist, and says that seeing him there is quite unexpected. Taiju agrees and greets her. The girl returns the kindness, and asks him what his current level of chi condensation is. The protagonist freezes for a moment before answering, and simply says that he has just reached level 1. But Jo Shiji realizes he is lying. This makes the protagonist think that his mist art has failed. Trying to cover up, he says that if she doesn't believe him, she can check for herself. However, the girl says that he must have reached the 2nd level about 2 years ago. Realizing that she is sharper than he imagined, the protagonist hesitates. She explains that once someone reaches the 2nd level, their body can no longer feel cold, and the fact that he is wearing thin clothes on a cold day proves that he is more advanced than he claims. Faced with these facts, the protagonist has no argument, and he had never thought of that conclusion before. Jo Shiji says that his talent must not be any less than the others, and she doesn't understand why he is hiding his abilities. But she says she will keep it a secret because she is trustworthy. Taiju realizes that he's cornered, and says that his uncle warned him that women are more observant than men, and now he sees that his uncle was right. He also says that he doesn't have to hide it anymore, but he had kept it hidden until now so that no one would know how strong he is, as it makes him feel safe that way. Then he tells the girl that he is currently at the 3rd level. She is pleasantly surprised and says that she is also at the 3rd level, but she hasn't been able to break through, having been stuck at that level for a year. The protagonist says that, if that's the case, she must be facing the same issue. But before he could say anything more, a voice says that the sun must be setting in the west because the trash protagonist has finally reached the 1st level. That voice is unmistakable to Taiju. Wangzhou says that this time, Taiju can walk down the hill on his own and no longer needs anyone's help. Amid the chatter, Zhang Xin appears and asks what's going on there, and why there's so much commotion. Seeing Zhang Xin there, Wangzhou falls silent and says nothing more. Jo Shiji asks if she can ask him a question. Shinji says she may proceed. She says that even after reaching the peak of the 3rd level of chi condensation, she is unable to break through and asks what she can do to overcome it. Jo Shiji understands her concern. It seems that his opportunity to explain the congestion in chi condensation has arrived, and he confirms that there is more than one chi blockage before the 6th level. One of them is between the 3rd and 4th levels, and the other between the 5th and 6th levels. These challenges can be very simple for some and difficult for others. The key to overcoming it is understanding the following phrase. People trained to be saints must be able to sever their ties with the mundane world. As for the bottleneck from the 5th to the 6th level, it is due to the fact that chi condensation undergoes changes, and the body is altered by spiritual energies. And besides going through a major transformation, it requires an enormous amount of aura, which is why it's a problem, concluded Jo Shiji. After that, new questions arise. They spend the day talking, and night falls. The protagonist steps outside for a bit, and with him, he has some gourds. Taiju fills all of them, and also takes the opportunity to drink the water from them. This makes him feel much better, although it doesn't compare to the water infused in the marble. The spiritual aura here is still dense. After filling everything, he stores the gourds in the bag that conceals the items. Then he concludes that it's time to return, as it's getting late. But as he stands up to leave, he senses a presence near him, and sees that it's Xiong, who recognizes him right away. Xiong appears and greets the protagonist. Taiju is startled to see him so suddenly. Xiong tells the protagonist that the water from that river contains spiritual energy, and drinking some of it will help him in his training. However, he noticed that the boy had already prepared some gourds, so he might have known this before coming to the valley. Taiju responds that he learned this from his master, who said that the water from this river could aid him in his training. and this is why Shurdi prepared some gourds of it. Xiong says it's natural that Sun Shu would know about this. He then tells the protagonist to return and train, as he has reached the first level of chi condensation in just 2 years. It seems that Shurdi is really determined, and that's good, he concludes, saying that he hopes to see him again when he reaches the next level. Tai Shu thanks him for his concern but says that his talent isn't as good as others, so he cannot push himself beyond what others already do. Sure, Xiong seems to believe him, and as the protagonist gets up, he feels a bit suspicious of the man. Quickly, he returns to his private cave, somewhat relieved that he wasn't discovered, but still worried about Sure Xiong. Everything that happened just now was a bit frightening for him. People who train to become saints are like the rest of mortals. They all carry some kind of special desire, but the ones here are much crueler than normal people. And because of that, he will keep his marble a secret, especially from someone like Sure Xiong, who enjoys stirring up trouble and intrigue. An extremely clever person. If he even suspects something, Tai Zhu can't imagine the consequences, so he must be careful around people like him. If he doesn't want someone like that around, then there is only one way to act: become stronger than them. Tai Zhu is certain of this. It seems that Zhou Shiji has already reached the limit of the 3rd level of Qi, but her Qi level isn't growing like his. The protagonist wonders why his spiritual aura keeps increasing, and what exactly is happening. For him, as long as there is no limit, he should stabilize at level 3 before attempting to reach level 4. After that, he activates the lever in his cave. With that, the door closes. He thinks that he won't reach the 4th level so soon, and he doesn't think he can easily cut ties with the mundane world. Inside the marble world, he feels that his 3rd level of Qi keeps growing without any limits, and he wonders if it's because he's been training there all this time. He also remembers the first time he felt pain when he touched the lights there. That's why he hasn't done it again since then. But now he wants to test his resistance, and tries to touch the light to see what happens. However, when he touches the light in the place, he realizes that he isn't getting hurt, and he doesn't feel any pain. Touching it is comfortably warm and relaxing. He was so focused on practicing in this place that he didn't have time to examine his surroundings more closely. Tai Zhu concludes that these lights carry a massive amount of spiritual aura. There is no aura around them. The special aura he feels here is likely coming from the lights. He still doesn't know the secrets of the place, but his current mission is to stabilize his Qi level at 3 and strengthen his attraction techniques. 4 years in reality and 25 in the dream world. If he adds up the other period, then the protagonist has trained for about 20 years. He wasn't able to condense his Qi to the 4th level, but his Qi has grown overwhelmingly. Today is the last day of training, not only for him but for everyone. In the morning, Sure Xiong appears and tells everyone to come out because the time is up. The sect leader is waiting for them in the grand hall. The stone doors begin to open all along the cliff face, and soon, the students start coming out of their caves. The protagonist is one of the first to emerge, and as soon as he lands on the ground, his old acquaintance Zhou Shiji appears and greets him. She says that he looks much taller now, and asks what level he's at. Tai Zhu says he won't hide his power this time, and she can see for herself if she wants. He adds that he's at the 3rd level and can't get past it no matter what he does. He spent 4 years reaching the 3rd level of Qi, even training on the mountain where there's enough spiritual aura, so he can somewhat explain everything. Zhou Shiji says that, being at the 3rd level, just like her, he hasn't been able to break away from the mundane world. The protagonist says that might be a good thing and that they can take care of each other, but he soon notices an unwanted presence. It could only be Wang Zhou. However, upon seeing him this time, he notices that Wang Zhou is at level 5. When condensation reaches the 5th level, the aura will then fuse. Tai Zhu tries to ignore Wang Zhou for now, and soon, he sees his friend Zhang Xin. He quickly realizes that Zhang Xin, being a senior student, is at the 6th level of Qi. Everyone has worked hard during these 4 years, and the protagonist refuses to fall behind. Then, everyone notices something different. They are struck by the same light that brought them there. The light hits them again, this time to take them back. When they arrive at the place they departed from, the leader greets them and says that 4 years have passed, and he is very pleased, because they all made great progress. The leader tells the disciples who reached the 5th level or higher to stay, while the others should report the results of their training to their respective masters. Because in 3 days, the rival sect will arrive for a visit, and this time the Hongyu sect should consider itself victorious. As for the robe changes due to the training, the leader says he will take care of that after the meeting. The protagonist returns to his cabin. Zhou Shiji accompanies him, and, with a pair of scissors, she cuts his long hair. She doesn't cut it too short, just trims the ends. Tai Zhu thanks her for her help, and the girl tells him he can go see his master now. He agrees and immediately goes to see him. When he arrives at the master's house, he greets him properly. However, Sun Zhonglao isn't at all pleased to see him. The master thinks that if the protagonist hadn't called on him like that, he would have completely forgotten about him. But since the boy came all the way there, the master tells him to come in. Taishu says he came to show respect to his master. Seeing him up close, Sun Jianlao is surprised, because the protagonist has indeed reached the 3rd level of chi condensation. The protagonist says he worked hard during the last 4 years in the Valley Mountain, and somehow managed to reach the 3rd level. Sun Jianlao thinks that now that the protagonist has reached the 1st level of chi condensation, he will allow him to experience the soul-searching art. But he ultimately decides against it, and says that he shouldn't take that risk. He adds that the boy has already reached the 3rd level of chi condensation, and has become a true disciple of Sun Jianlao. The master says that he has only accepted one student in his entire life, and from now on, he wants his disciple to live near him, and that in a few days, there will be a meeting with the disciples of the rival sect. At that time, the protagonist will go with him to see the visitors and broaden his perspective. Sun Jianlao asks the protagonist if he has been practicing the art of attraction. He replies that he has, but he feels a bit tense. The master says that's natural with the holy art, and to be honest, it all depends on proficiency. The more he practices, the more natural it will become. Sun Jianlao says that he himself trained for about a year in his time, and because of that, he is considered one who trained for the longest time. The master gives a demonstration, and from his hand he summons a shining flying sword. The protagonist's eyes widen when he sees it, and he thinks the technique is really cool. Sun Jianlao says that after becoming proficient in the art of attraction, if the protagonist reaches the 2nd level of chi condensation, he will be able to practice the art of expulsion of objects. The sword relies on the art of expulsion to be activated, and one must have trained to the 4th level of chi condensation to do so. However, the exchange gathering with the Xiandao sect is approaching, and he cannot let others see his disciple as a joke, since his level is still low. He also says that this sword can be controlled slightly with the art of attraction, which is why he will give the protagonist an activation token. The master tells the protagonist to take the item to the spiritual sword hall, and randomly pick a flying sword that looks good. And when he does that, he should hang the token on his body. Sun Jianlao asks if the disciple understands. He says yes and promises to find one that can deceive the others. The master adds that by holding the token, the disciple will be able to enter the herb garden freely, but he must remember that, without his permission, he cannot touch the herbs. After clarifying this, the master dismisses the protagonist. In his thoughts, Sun Jianlao says that even though the protagonist is trash, he is still able to show a confident expression, which really makes him annoying. At the spiritual sword hall, the protagonist arrives and sees someone sleeping. He approaches the entrance of the place, and remembers that he had been there before, when he tried to enter and was stopped by the spiritual swords. The person in charge of the place says the protagonist has just reached the 3rd level of chi condensation, and asks why he came here, because he should only go to a place like this after reaching the 4th level of chi condensation. Taizhu simply tosses his token to the man. The man takes the object in his hands, and when he sees what's written on it, he starts laughing. After that, he says that this is a tradition of Sun Jianlao, and he had almost forgotten about it. He reveals that Sun Jianlao has a habit. Every time there's an exchange gathering with other sects, he must present a flying sword. With that, he tells the protagonist that he can enter, and recommends that he take the 3rd one on the right, as those flying swords are incredible. He also says that when he first entered the place, he thought he would find more powerful flying swords in the Zhao Empire. The protagonist thanks him for the information and heads inside. Lastly, the man says that the trash master finally accepted the trash disciple. Hearing this surprises the protagonist, as he didn't know that his master also had such a reputation. Next to the man's table, an item begins to glow, and he panics. He says that he forgot to close the formation. Then, he is struck on the forehead, and after that, he is hit in several places. The force of it throws him to the ground, leaving him desperate because he doesn't know if what he saw was an illusion or not. Meanwhile, the protagonist reaches the entrance of the place. The glowing light from before appears, but this time he doesn't back down. Soon, the light starts moving toward him, and Tai Shu prepares for a possible impact. A spiritual sword manifests, and flies toward him, but the protagonist remains unfazed, because this time he manages to use a force field, and walks calmly without being hit. No matter how many swords come at him, he defends against all of them, and continues walking toward his destination. As he approaches the end, he sees a spirit manifesting right in front of him, and says that no matter who it is, they can attack because he is not afraid. Faced with the energy enemy, it transforms into a kind of dragon, and charges at the protagonist. Taizhu prepares to fight. Using his ability, he tries to fend off the enemy. He uses Chi Aura hands to fight, and defend himself from the dragon. The protagonist grabs the enemy's mouth, and tries to tear it apart. With his strength, he manages to do so. Soon, the passage through the door becomes clear. Even though he's tired after the fight, the protagonist feels incredible for having won. The man guarding the place is astonished by the protagonist. He remembers that even a pair of sure shoe wouldn't be able to enter using force, except during the selection of disciples for the sect. Only when they are accepting new disciples do they weaken the dragon's energy matrix. Then they release the sword within the chi in the room and choose the most suitable ones. With this, he wonders how the protagonist managed to enter the place. Even the protagonist himself doesn't know how he got in. After arriving inside the place, Taiju sees the swords, but none in particular catch his attention. There are many swords inside, and the protagonist feels confused about which one to choose. He spots a golden flying sword, and wonders if it's the most renowned in the Zhao Empire, as the fat man outside mentioned. This flying sword does indeed seem very promising. He thinks he won't use it right away, but if he runs out of money in the future, he could easily find a place to sell it for a good price. The protagonist also notices a stone tablet, and reads that the sword's name is Wealth. 500 years ago, an ancestor of the sect believed it was made of gold, which is said to possess immeasurable power, but in reality, the sword was broken multiple times. Its creator, before his death, had one wish: to leave the sword in the Hall of Spiritual Swords for a fated person to find, and the one chosen by the sword must treat it well and bond with it, and if they don't, they will be expelled from the sect. Upon reading this, the protagonist starts laughing, saying that this is very amusing. He then picks up the sword and says he'll take it. But being a poor man, he tells the sword that if it ever breaks, don't expect him to bond with it again. After placing the sword in the bag that hides items, he leaves, and the guard tells him to be careful. Taiju wonders why the man's attitude changed so suddenly. The fat man thinks that in the future, he can't continue judging people by their appearance. The protagonist walks and sees that the pill room seems to be nearby, and he hasn't seen Wang Zhao in 4 years, so he wonders what he's been up to. He then walks toward the pill room, and when he arrives at the place, he sees his friend Hao and greets him, but Hao tells him to stay quiet, and pulls him to another place. After running far from the room, the protagonist asks why all the secrecy. Hao doesn't seem to be feeling well, and the protagonist notices this, asking what's wrong with him. When he looks inside his friend's body, he realizes that his spiritual aura is scattered all over. Hao says that as expected, his friend noticed, and that the formation of the gathering was different. He asks what level of chi condensation Taiju is at now. The protagonist replies that he's at the 3rd level, but that doesn't matter now, and asks what happened to his friend's body. Hao explains that at the auction 4 years ago, he couldn't trade for a pill, and was meditating on the issue, when his master unintentionally gave him the Zhao Hua pill. He did this, saying it was his way of repaying Hao for being his assistant. He also gave him a type of medicinal soup to boost his spiritual aura after drinking it. Hao was surprised at that moment, and his master also gave him a gong fu. His mind went blank, and he didn't think much about it, so he began practicing. The protagonist asks what this gong fu was. Hao explains that after practicing for those 4 years, his body worsened as it evolved, even as his spiritual aura appeared, ignoring its commands. Later, in secret, he asked others in the scripture terminal to help him, and that's when he found out it was called Great Greenhouse Fire Test Art. Taiju asks what benefits there would be in learning to use such a technique. Hao asks if his friend wants to use him as a greenhouse. The protagonist doesn't know what he means. Hao says that the copy of Gong Fu the disciple gave him in the scripture room showed great detail. The user who practices the fire test art disperses their essence at death, and if used with a special method, it can be harnessed to create a life pill. And if one consumes the pill, it extends life by 3 years. Hao says that if he had known that at the start, he wouldn't have become a doctor's assistant. But now it's too late, as they've discovered that he's been training, and they're blackmailing his parents. At this moment, he has no control over his body, and he has to take countless pills every day, and his aura is growing without any assistance. He also says that at this rate, he only has a year left to live, and if he dies, he wants the protagonist to tell his parents that he became a saint and went far away to train. However, the protagonist grabs Hao's arm. Hao doesn't understand why and says that he's hurting him. But soon, he realizes that his friend is shaken by this news. Hao tells him not to worry about this situation, and that Lun Yun is already at the 6th level of chi condensation. The protagonist is impressed by this, and his friend says they can't win against him. At that moment, the feeling of weakness and lack of courage returns to the protagonist. At that point, he entered the domain called enlightenment. This enlightenment didn't increase his strength or his soul, but rather the truth about the world's rules. Taiju understood that the formation was cruel and hopeless. It was a survival of the fittest experience, a place where the strong devour the weak, and where everything is based on strength. This is the world of training. A bright light appears in the dream world. It seemingly brings people from afar. From above, it descends and lands on the ground, When this happens, someone emerges from the depths. The protagonist is transported there, but he has no idea why, since the process was involuntary. Seeing the lights around him, he remembers that he was in the forest with Hao, but out of nowhere, he was transported there, and he wonders why. Taiju looks up, and notices that all the lights have disappeared. Now, he's alone in the void, and he wonders what's happening. The protagonist tries to look around, but a voice appears saying he doesn't need to do that. It also says that with his Ling Dong at the execution stage, trying to see the supernatural sky within this marble is a foolish dream. Taiju thinks there shouldn't be anyone else in the void, and tries to guess who is talking to him. He then introduces himself to the voice and asks who is speaking to him. The voice says that for someone at the 3rd level of chi condensation, it's simply like the youth formation of this country. So, Taiju is not qualified to know. Even so, the voice introduces itself as Sitinwan, the old man who brought the protagonist into the marble. Taiju asks why. Situ responds that it was due to his disgust, and also his hatred. Sitinwan says that someone training to become a saint should be like that. The way things were before, the protagonist made him feel disgusted. The formation to become a saint is an act that originally descends from the heavens. If someone provokes you, kill them. He also says that Taiju has been in this crappy sect for years, and he's been watching him in the shadows, as he's wanted to wipe out the entire sect long ago, for revenge. For the protagonist, this was expected, as this person had always been in the marble stone. For 30 years, he was being watched at all times. Moreover, Sitinwan says that the protagonist drives him crazy, and if he had stolen his soul, he would have thrown it into the cycle of purgatory, and then gone to his home to kill his entire family. Sitinwan also says that Zhang would be fine in the sect, and he likes him a lot for being cruel. He also likes the young man nicknamed Squirrel Face because he suits his personal taste. The protagonist tries to argue, but Sitinwan tells him not to interrupt, as he's not finished speaking yet. He continues talking and mentions that there's a couple in the sect who are really good, and that he spent 30 years of his time helping the protagonist get out, even with the help of the turbulence in the marble sky. Taiju was only able to reach the Ling Dong stage. The protagonist asks about this Ling Dong stage and the false conclusion. Sitinwan says that the protagonist shouldn't disappoint him and should train more diligently, and even reach the baby transformation stage, so the old man can get out of the marble. Taiju asks the old man what this baby transformation is, and heard the old man say he was a Ling Dong of false conclusion, but doesn't know what that means. The old man asks if the protagonist can't think for himself, and has to ask everything, but he concludes that a boy at the 3rd level of training wouldn't be able to, as thinking about it might break his mind, and he wouldn't be able to find the answer. Taiju can only think about how annoying this old man is. Situnwan then talks about the levels starting from the 5th level of training and says that the protagonist, in this way, is at the 3rd rank in the training level by rank. The levels of chi condensation first consist of the foundation, then comes the gem formation, and third, the infant soul. Once a person in the modification phase appears in the 3rd level formation rank, their level will rise and transform into one of the training levels by rank. At the same time, when a person in the infant phase appears in the 4th level, they will rise to a 5th rank training level. The Ling Dong phase refers to a basic formation level, called upon by the 4th rank and the higher formation levels, and is equivalent to chi condensation. The protagonist tries to argue, saying that he is very slow, but Situnwan says that's nonsense. He explains that, as an elder and an experienced 6th level training rank expert helping him, a mere baby transformation is nothing, even though he cannot leave. He used the essence of his infant soul to strengthen the protagonist's foundations every time he sat on the marble, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to evolve on his own. Situnwan says that the protagonist absorbed the essence of his soul and should at least be a specialist at the same level as him, and no one will be able to see through his energy. He also says that the protagonist has the turbulence of the sky marble in his hands, and should not be afraid of him, for it was because he tried to steal this item that he ended up in his formation. He used enormous amounts of power, and had his body destroyed by someone else, almost causing his soul to disappear completely. Originally, Situnwan had planned to rot inside a body, but once the sky turbulence marble entered it, he couldn't leave. The elder claims he's not lying and that the first time Tai entered, he intended to possess his body, but the marble's prison wouldn't let him leave. When he entered the marble, he didn't have time to study it before. The marble requires all 5 elements, gold, wood, water, fire, and earth, before it will recognize its owner. He also promises that, with him protecting the protagonist in the future, he will be able to enjoy delicious food. Situnwan concludes that he's said a lot for the protagonist to absorb, and instructs Tai to return and not to put the marble in the bag but in his chest pocket, so they can continue talking. He adds that he can conceal the spiritual energy of the object to disguise it from others. However, it's not good to stay inside the marble for too long, and he says he'll send him out. The protagonist is ready to leave, but would like to ask one last question. However, before he can do so, he is transported out of the place. Taizhu realizes he's outside, and finds himself reunited with his friend Hao. Seeing that he is still holding his arm, he quickly lets go and apologizes. The protagonist speaks aloud, saying he will help Sitan get his justice. 3 days after this encounter, the Hingyu Sect's bell rang 9 times. At that moment, a black dot appeared in the sky, slowly approaching the Sect's mountain. Around the Sect's mountain, a giant centipede-like creature flies over the area. The being approaches the mountain, and the leader of the Hingyu Sect sees it from afar. He and the others don't quite understand what they are seeing, wondering what exactly it is. As it approaches, the creature does not slow down, but instead speeds up, frightening everyone present. The sect leader remains undaunted, and faces the creature head-on. After that, he uses his abilities, and summons a spiritual sword. He immediately commands something to emerge from it, and a purple dragon manifests. With the strength of its master, it charges toward the invading creature. Both monsters face each other in midair, and someone observing everything seems to enjoy what they are seeing. The sect members are dazzled by the leader's dragon. Even the protagonist is impressed. From atop the centipede, someone calls the sect leader a friend and marvels at his sword, saying that the rumors about it containing the soul of a dragon are not false, and the guardian beast spirit of the Xian Dao sect is also unique. After this, several people descend from the centipede, and land on the sect's grounds. Their leader greets Huanglong of the Hengyu sect, saying that he hasn't seen him in 20 years. He also says that if they, from the Xian Dao sect, win this time, the Hengyu sect must honor their promises. Huanglong says the same applies to them. He then recalls his dragon into the sword, and the Xian Dao sect members begin to approach. However, a woman stands out among them all. She has a beautiful appearance, especially her eyes. Even the protagonist feels that his consciousness is more drawn to her than usual. The elders are more perceptive, and conclude that the Xian Dao sect using the sinful practice of charm is very dirty, even for them. Their leader, Dao Sujinran, says that they should look more closely, because his disciples have not practiced any charm art. They were simply born with a water spiritual root. The protagonist is present at the gathering and listens to what the leader of Xian Dao has to say. He says he has observed the disciples there, and none of them possess such a spiritual root. On average, they are a complete disaster with the 5 elements, and it's no wonder their leader wasn't able to see that. After hearing this, the protagonist asks Sitan what the water spiritual root is. From the marble, the old man tells Tai that a normal person can have up to 5 spiritual roots, and the elements are not complete, but they can be enhanced through training. Meanwhile, Huanglong notices that his companions are getting scared, and if he lets this conversation go on any longer, it will only get worse. He then tells the others from Xian Dao to rest from the trip, and that the official exchange meeting will begin the next day. Dao Sujinren agrees and says they have a long-standing friendship. Regarding the exchange, although both sides have their stakes, they will not disturb the calm atmosphere of the place. Some time passes on the mountain. An elder from the sect greets Dao Su and asks if he remembers his old friend. He replies that he does, especially the wine he brewed the last time. One of the handsome members of Xian Dao is being courted by the local girls, and a girl from Xian Dao is also being courted, but she drives away the boys who approach. The protagonist observes everything from afar, and notices that their level of training seems to be obscured by layers of mist. Therefore, he can't measure their strength, but when he least expects it, someone approaches him calmly. From afar, Taizhu notices that it's the woman who caught everyone's attention at the entrance. She just smiles at the protagonist. He politely greets her, and she returns his kindness. In her thoughts, she says he is not normal, because even under her charm art, he is the first to regain consciousness. Taizhu, in turn, wonders why the woman keeps looking at him, as he doesn't find her that attractive. After that, he distances himself from everyone, and stays alone in an isolated place, until someone approaches again. This time it's Zhou Shiji, who greets him. She tries to sneak up on him, but fails to scare him. The protagonist is a bit startled to see her, and the girl asks why he's lost in thought again. Taizhu says it's nothing and asks if she's okay. Zhou Shiji just says that he has learned to misbehave. The two enjoy each other's company, and Zhou Shiji thanks the protagonist. He doesn't know why. She says that only when she talks to him can she truly relax, with nothing to worry about and nothing to compare. The protagonist feels a bit awkward, and seeing the girl right in front of him, he thinks that he should be the one thanking her. He then jokingly tells Zhou Shiji not to say she's a good person. She quickly understands the joke, and gets irritated, but also happy. Zhou Shiji enjoys his company, and they stay there for a while. The next day, the exchange meeting between the Xian Dao sect and the Hengyu sect is about to begin, and it's announced who will go in the first round: Zhao Long from the Hengyu sect, against Ling Feng from the Xian Dao sect. In the world there is something called spiritual aura. After humans absorb it into their bodies, it changes their physique. These people are known as saints. Saints can utilize their spiritual aura to do things beyond common understanding. These are known as saintly arts. In a field of flowers, some bloom among the others. Both opponents face each other, and Ling Feng from the Xian Dao sect waits to be attacked. Zhao Long from the Hengyu sect uses one of his abilities to grab the flower petals and use them as weapons to attack his opponent. Ling Feng doesn't even move after that, he simply waits to act. The leader of Hengyu says that this technique is really good. Using the lotus sword of Qi seemed like a good option to him. One of his men says that Zhao is the disciple he is most proud of, as his talent is excellent, and he has trained the lotus sword for 5 years to reach the intermediate rank. Such a technique is well known by the others. Even the leader of Xian Dao praises the elegance of this skill. Zhao Long is surrounded by the petals, and then throws them like darts. However, his opponent repels them all with just a fan. The ease with which he defends himself annoys the leader of Hengyu a little. Zhao Long becomes frustrated at not being able to hit him, so he focuses even more and tries to act more aggressively. But his opponent counters all the attacks. Despite Zhao Long's technique being elegant, it only looks impressive and lacks real value. Ling Feng summons a shield to defend himself, and with it, he protects himself from the enemy's attacks. The leader of Hengyu and the others are impressed by the fact that the Lotus Chi sword was absorbed. Zhao Long from afar realizes that his technique has failed and is shocked. Ling Feng says it's impolite not to return what you've received, and says that, through this Lotus Chi sword, he will see what will be returned. With that, Ling Feng uses the energy he absorbed to strike back. Zhao Long simply stares at the enemy's counterattack, which is about to hit him squarely, but he tries to act quickly, and uses some talismans to defend himself. After summoning a kind of shadow shield, he attempts to advance, but his shield is not very sturdy. Soon, the opponent's needle-like attacks begin to pierce through, and slowly hit Zhao Long. Realizing he is about to be struck, he panics. His opponent rejoices in the imminent victory, and Zhao Long, in turn, is hit in the shoulder, and falls immediately afterward. Sarcastically, Ling Feng thanks his opponent for letting him win. Zhao Long, still dazed, realizes that he lost. His leader and master were disappointed. He returns to his master and asks for forgiveness for the dishonor. But his master says that he did his best, and the opponent was simply stronger, so he can return and rest. Far away, atop a hill, the protagonist watches everything closely. He observed the entire fight, concluding that the technique of the one who won is indeed strange. While watching Ling Feng from afar, someone calls him by name. The protagonist realizes it's the centipede of the Xian Dao leader. He looks at the centipede, and doesn't understand what it wants with him. Then he realizes that one of his sect members is introducing him to the others as the famous trash from there, and says it would be better for him to take care of the centipede. The protagonist becomes irritated by this, but immediately after, he goes to a place and grabs some food, asking if the centipede wants it. She indicates that she does. With that, the protagonist becomes delighted, and orders the centipede to lie down. With that, he gives the food to the creature, and says that after becoming small, she is quite cute. Afterward, Ling Feng returns to his group, and one of them praises him for his performance in the fight. Ling Feng says the next one will depend on him. Soon, his friend steps forward to battle, introducing himself as Su Mu Shixiong. The sect leader knows it's time to act, so he pulls out some plaques from his pocket and throws them into the air. After activating his items, a summoning light appears in front of him. Soon, some of his allies appear, and he tells Lu Song that it's his turn to fight. After emerging at the leader's command, Lu Song prepares to fight. One of his companions stares at the opponent, and Su Mu Shixiong stares back at them. In the past, they have faced each other before, and Lu Song lost the fight. Even after a hard-fought battle, he still couldn't win. But now he's more focused. His sect companions say he's the number one among them and that, for sure, they will win this time. They wish their friend good luck. Meanwhile, he steps onto the battlefield. From afar, the protagonist watches the battle accompanied by the centipede. He notices that the strength Song is demonstrating is of the 12th level, but he can't see the strength of the opponent. However, the leader said the strength of both is equivalent, as they must have faced each other before. With this, the protagonist concludes that this will be an interesting battle. Shixiong is called by his leader. He says he will allow Su Mu to use all his strength. Those who hear this think that, before, Su Mu Shixiong wasn't intending to fight at full power, and they conclude that this is absurd. But the leader of Hengyu knows more than they do, and upon seeing Su Mu Shixiong removing a talisman from himself, he becomes worried for his fighter, because now the talisman that hid Su Mu Shixiong's true strength is removed, and there is nothing holding him back anymore. Taizhu realizes this, and in other words, Shixiong is not going to hold back, which also limits his body's abilities. The leader of Xian Dao says that his sect has an ancestor who returned from the 4th rank of training on the battlefield outside the country and brought with him some new things. He also says that all the ancestors of the Hangyu sect died, which makes those present feel afraid. In turn, Taiju wonders what that means. Huanglong tells the other leader not to speak nonsense. Otherwise, he cannot blame the Hangyu sect for showing him no respect. The members of the Hangyu sect are desperate upon hearing these words, but the leader tells them to calm down because, whether it's true or not, the elders at the pill formation stage will handle the matter. He then tells Lu Song to continue the match. His opponent cuts one of his fingers, and with the blood, he makes a bracelet on his left arm. Then he takes another bleeding finger, and makes the same bracelet on his right arm. After finishing, Shi Xiong draws his sword, and through it, he is able to summon several others, creating a sort of shield of blades around him. Without further ado, he charges for the attack, and heads towards his opponent. Noticing his approach, Lu Song prepares himself. He also has a sword but first attacks with a lightning skill. Right after, he advances, and holding his spiritual sword, Song gets ready to strike his opponent. Shi Xiong throws some swords in his direction, but he manages to deflect them all and continues advancing. His opponent waits for his arrival, but he still tries to stop him with his swords. Song gets rid of all of them along the way, and finally gets close enough to his opponent. With this, they face each other head to head. Sumu Shi Xiong tells his sword to scream now. As he holds it in his hands, Lu Song senses something is wrong. Even the protagonist from afar hears the sword scream. With that, Song pulls back, and tries to think of another strategy. His opponent notices something coming towards him and gets startled. Soon a powerful energy catches him by surprise. He tries to block the attack, but realizes it is too heavy. Unable to withstand it, he is thrown back. And wasting no time, Lu Song approaches again, this time from behind. However, Shi Xiong notices this and defends as best as he can. He uses his sword to block the opponent's attack, but Lu Song had expected something like this. With his sword in hand, he uses another one of his abilities, and summons a dark energetic attack. The protagonist realizes that this attack is very similar to the dragon that attacked him in the sword room. But this time, the dragon seems darker. His fellow sect members celebrate Song's superiority in the battle. However, his opponent comments that it was dangerous, and the timing was perfect. Taiju is amazed at what he sees. Even the leader of the Xian Dao sect is surprised, along with Lu Song, who did not expect something like this. Sumu Shi Xiong grabs his sword, and then notices that his opponent's hands are not clean. Song remembers that at the beginning of the battle, his opponent made a blood bracelet, and realizes that now his opponent is using it to defend himself. Shi Xiong unknowingly broke his sword. Lu Song seizes this opportunity, and tries to attack him off guard. He once again uses his electric dragon, but with his other hand, the opponent blocks the attack. Now Lu Song has few options left. Shi Xiong notices this and feels pleased. However, Song uses the most basic form of attack, and tries to land a punch on his opponent. Shi Xiong feels superior for having blocked two of his opponent's attacks. He stares at him with a superior look, but before he realizes it, he's surprised by a punch. With the impact, the blow throws him far away. The leader of his sect is not at all pleased by this. Unlike Huanglong, who feels delighted, those from his sect who saw it celebrate. Shi Xiong, after being thrown, manages to get back on his feet and land. After that, he bites his lip in anger. He charges towards his opponent. Lu Song blows a cloud of smoke. That seems a little toxic. Shi Xiong dodges the smoke as he advances, but what appeared to be just smoke turns into a hand that tries to grab him. However, Shi Xiong's speed allows him to escape between the attacks. Shi Xiong gets close and punches his opponent, but Lu Song manages to block it. The impact of the punch, even with the block, is strong enough to throw him back too. Now Shi Xiong feels satisfied for managing to hit back. Next, he launches long-range attacks. Lu Song prepares to take the hit. The projectiles head towards him, and Shi Xiong is happy about it, but soon realizes something went wrong. Lu Song emerges amidst a cloud of dust, with his right fist raised high. Shi Xiong looks up, and notices that a shadow has covered him. A hand made of the same material that Song used is about to strike him. He is startled by this, while Lu Song says this is the end for his opponent. In a rush, Shi Xiong uses a talisman, and throws it into the air. Then, he spits blood, which lands directly on the talisman. Shi Xiong has not given up yet. The protagonist notices the strategy, and is impressed. Lu Song realizes the opponent used a spiritual treasure. Shi Xiong's talisman is thrown into the air, and it collides with Song's massive attack. As it gets closer, the item absorbs the attack, drawing it into itself. Taiju realizes he also has a talisman like that, because his old friend Zhang Fu gave it to him before they parted ways, and told him the talisman was of the path of the wind, in addition to being a spiritual treasure. Back to the fight, Lu Song tries once more to use the energy hands, and with them, he grabs the opponent. Realizing he's immobilized, Shi Xiong panics. Noticing this, Lu Song tries to use it to his advantage, and Shi Xiong does not like it at all. He stands still while Song attacks. His two energetic dragons advance on the opponent, and Lu Song is eager to win the fight. Shi Xiong, still immobilized, doesn't know how to react. His blood hands aren't working. He becomes desperate because of this, realizing the enemy's attack is getting closer and closer. Already thinking he's going to lose, all that's left is to insult his opponent. Seeing this, one of his sect members reacts, and the others are impressed. Even the leader of the organization notices something different. In the battle, Shi Xiong is in trouble, and the dragons are less than a second from hitting him. But at the last moment, several spiritual swords appear to defend him. Some even break in the process, and realizing his attack wasn't lethal, Lu Song is shocked. He suddenly starts to bleed, scaring the leader of his sect. The others present wonder what happened. Meanwhile, one of the female students approaches him, and helps him withdraw from the battle. Shi Xiong realizes this was thanks to his sect mate. The leader of the Hangyu sect also notices this, and says the rival sect members are pushing their luck. Even the protagonist notices that Shi Xiong was helped. The student who interfered just stays silent. His leader stares at him for a brief moment, but seems satisfied with his action. He says that, regarding this match, the victory is theirs. As for what happened, he's not sure what to say. The one who interfered tells the master there's no need for something like this. He leaves where he was standing, and says that the Hangyu sect is nothing but trash. He also claims that all their disciples are inferior, and challenges them to come at him all at once. Introducing himself as Zhoping, he says he'll deal with all of them at once. Realizing such an affront, the Hangyu leader doesn't like it at all. Even Lu Song isn't satisfied with the fight. The Xian Dao leader says Zhoping is from his sect, and with him, they will end this once and for all, and says that if someone from the other sect can last a few seconds against him, then the victory will go to Hangyu. The protagonist is surprised by this offer. Shi Xiong, who had been silent until now, steps forward and says the other leader's tone is arrogant. He presents himself to face the opponent, and says he's willing to play with him. Zhoping just laughs and mocks his opponent. As soon as the battle begins, Zhoping makes an invocation, and Shi Xiong is impressed, because the opponent summoned a giant serpent. It charges at Shi Xiong. He's a bit scared. Shortly after, the serpent grabs him by the neck, bringing him closer to its master. Suffocated by the snake's tongue, Shi Xiong panics, and his opponent just stares at him with a benevolent gaze. Huang Long doesn't like seeing his sect student in this state. Unlike Jinren, who is proud of his disciple. Far away, the protagonist notices that the snake is made of spiritual energy. So far, Zhoping is in the lead. His serpent throws the opponent far away, and he crashes into a rocky wall. The leader of the Hangyu sect witnesses this, and feels bad for yet another defeat. Zhoping boasts, laughing loudly. After winning, he says he expected more from a sect like that. He also says they'd better come all at once. However, the others find him too arrogant. Huang Long, faced with this situation, doesn't know how to react. Shi Xiong is rescued by the others. Meanwhile, the Xian Dao leader is delighted. The girls from Hangyu don't know how to react, nor do the older students. Even the masters are afraid because the rival sect brings much stronger opponents than them. Hearing the murmurs of his sect members leaves the leader irritated. From the height of his arrogance, Zhoping says they are really a bunch of trash. Still on the hill, Taizhu stares at him from afar. Zhoping sees him from where he is, and stares back. The protagonist doesn't like his attitude at all. His eyes lock onto the Xian Dao member. Zhoping says the protagonist's expression is quite good, and asks if he wants to try his luck. But Taizhu wasn't expecting this. He's unsure if the man is really talking to him. Zhoping says yes. The protagonist's master is startled by this provocation. Even the sect leader asks whom Zhoping is referring to. One of the masters says that the protagonist is known as the biggest trash of the sect. The leader then recognizes him as Wang Lin, and says that, even though he's low-level trash, his expression didn't show fear when provoked. Compared to the other disciples, his courage is something admirable. The leader also asks what he's doing up there. One of the subordinates says he was sent to take care of the beast of the Xian Dao sect. Another master says the leader should let the protagonist fight, as even if he loses, his defeat wouldn't be shameful. The protagonist's master tells Dao Shu that he may be his Shi Xiong, but he cannot mistreat his student like that, as he's only at the 3rd level, and if he fights, they will be embarrassed. Dao Shu falls silent after hearing this. One of the members says the protagonist's expression is that of someone confident, and the sect leader should let him try, as he himself is curious about it. The leader says he's seen many who can be called trash, but the protagonist is undoubtedly the most famous. He says he won't force him and that the choice to fight is his. Wang Zhou appears and says if the protagonist goes, it will be a disgrace, but he must be very afraid and doubts he'll go. However, the protagonist accepts the fight, surprising not only Wang Zhou, but also all the other sect members. Except for the leader, who already expected something like this. Sun Zhonglao says his student is only at the 3rd level. Sending him would be like signing his death sentence. But the leader says it's the protagonist's desire to go. In his thoughts, Sun Zhonglao thinks that if the protagonist brings him any dishonor, he'll kill him. Wang Zhou says the protagonist is an idiot. Zhou Shiji is the only one worried about him. Unlike the others, who just want to see a show, Tai Zhu enters the battlefield. He is recognized by the woman who tried to seduce him earlier. The Xian Dao sect leader laughs at them for sending someone like him to the fight. The others from his sect also laugh, calling the protagonist trash. However, Tai Zhu doesn't bow his head and tells the opponent that they'll have a good fight. Zhou Ping is genuinely surprised that the protagonist accepted the challenge. He also says that his courage is so admirable that he'll send him to the afterlife gently, and will fight with only 2 fingers to keep the battle balanced. Hearing this, the protagonist becomes angry. Zhou Ping tells him to watch carefully. Everyone in his sect concludes that he will suffer a devastating defeat. The protagonist levitates from the ground, and immediately after, a large impact occurs against a rocky wall. The members of his sect stand with their mouths open at what they just witnessed. Their leader, who had his eyes closed, opens them slowly to check. He and the others are surprisingly seeing the protagonist standing. The leader is very surprised, because Tai Zhu is not only standing, but he's levitating off the ground and dodged the opponent's attack. Everyone in his sect is extremely shocked by this. Even the members of the rival sect are stunned. Tai Zhu stands firmly on the battlefield, ready to fight. He tries to talk to the elder trapped in the marble sphere, and asks him why he's stuck at the 3rd level, and why he can't break through the mundane world. The elder replies that it's just a misunderstanding of comprehension, and affirms that he must always be motivated in everything he does, and with that, evolution will have no limits. As for why he's at the 3rd level, that he cannot answer. However, one thing he's certain of, Tai Zhu's level has completely surpassed the Lingdong phase. This also means that he is now equal to Zhao Goi, at the 14th level of Qi, and just 1 level below completing the Qi condensation. After being counterattacked, Zhou Ping furiously curses the protagonist, and says he's going to finish him. Zhou Ping returns to the fight, and says the protagonist truly hid his real strength, and concludes that he was careless. He then says this is the protagonist's death wish, using his snake to attack him. But the protagonist doesn't even move. He uses his spiritual aura to grab the snake. With his hand made of spiritual energy, he crushes the serpent as if it were paper. Soon it begins to disintegrate, and explodes into tiny pieces, leaving its owner enraged. His power is so overwhelming that the onlookers can't believe what they are witnessing. Zhou Shiji sees this and wonders if the protagonist truly has a 3rd level Qi. The leader of his sect judges him as someone truly interesting. The envious ones, despite calling him trash, ask themselves since when did the protagonist become so strong? One of the masters tells Sun Zhonglao that he has an excellent disciple, and yet he lied, saying he was trash, perhaps waiting for a grand entrance. In his thoughts, Sun Zhonglao says that the liar is Tai Zhu because he increased his strength, and this must be related to the spiritual gourd. He also thinks that the protagonist dared to lie, and he shouldn't be blamed if he's cruel in the future. The members of the rival sect also don't believe in the protagonist's strength, saying that the rival sect must be hiding their true potentials and objectives. Injured after the blow, Zhou Ping says he is from the Xian Dao sect, and wonders how it's possible to lose to someone everyone knows as trash. He concludes that this is impossible and calls the protagonist to fight again. But then, the leader of his sect tells him to shut up, and completely knocks him out, removing his unconscious body from the battlefield. The protagonist just looks at them seriously, and his leader realizes that the rival sect is looking for an excuse to conquer their mountain. One of the masters says that they've had a good relationship for years, and asks why they would do this. The leader replies that the relationship between the sects is good because they were afraid of the Hengyu founder, but now that he's dead, the rival sect has bad intentions. The Hengyu masters ask what they will do now. Meanwhile, the Xian Dao leader says the protagonist was able to defeat his strongest disciple, and his power is exceptional. Then, his centipede appears in its monstrous form. Soon all the members of his sect retreat to it. Huang Long notices their retreat and tells his men to return inside the mountain immediately and report to Ancestor Jia Dan about the current situation. The disciples conclude that their sect is in trouble, all thanks to the protagonist. Zhou Shiji is the only one who sides with him on this. Before leaving, the Xian Dao leader says it's a pity that those who become enemies of his sect won't have a good ending, and that today's exchange between the sects was a dead end. But tomorrow, the founder of his sect and the Hengyu expert will compare their skills. He concludes by saying that if the protagonist sect loses, they must leave the mountain forever. After that, he and his followers leave on the centipede, while the members of Hengyu watch them. Back at home, Sun Zhonglao is furious. He says it seems like they can't wait any longer, and tells his men to call the protagonist over. He arrives and greets his master. Upon seeing his master, the protagonist thinks that now that he's at the 14th level of Lingqi, it won't be easy to kill him, even if he wishes to. In fact, he wants to see what kind of medicine de Zhu Meng bought that's in the gourd. Sun Zhonglao serves tea and tells his disciple to drink, as it is a spiritual medicine specially prepared for him. And after drinking, he should gather his belongings and follow him out of the sect. He also says that the Hingyu sect is facing an imminent catastrophe, and when the Xian Dao sect's founder arrives, everyone will be fleeing for their lives. Tai Shu looks at the cup and realizes there are problems, as expected. He tells his master that he's not thirsty and won't drink the tea. The master, furious, insists that he drink, saying the disciple shouldn't force his master to hit him. After that, he says he can't reject his master's good intentions. But instead of drinking, he grabs his master with his hand of spiritual energy. Sun Zhonglao asks what kind of enchantment the protagonist is using. Tai Zhu says he thought the master might be thirstier than him. Then, he forces the master to drink the tea. Sun Zhonglao calls the protagonist a traitor and says that if he kills his master, the sect won't let him leave alive. The protagonist doesn't seem to care much about that. He watches the effects of the tea on his master, and the way he acts frightens him. The master screams in pain. All of his energy aura leaves his body, and he becomes dry and wrinkled. Tai Zhu tells the master that he didn't want to kill him, but he did have such intentions, and if he had drunk the tea, he would have fallen into his evil plans. Sun Zhonglao says he couldn't have drunk the tea because it contained Shurxian Chong Chao, capable of controlling a person's movements for a short period. He adds that, ever since the boy appeared with the gourd, he was confused and accepted him as a disciple, hoping he would reach the first level of Lingqi. Because, through that, he would use the soul-collecting art on the boy, but he didn't expect him to reach the 3rd level so quickly, ruining his plans. In order to obtain his secrets, Sun Zhonglao couldn't be careless, as he was old and there was no more progress for him. He states that if the protagonist discovered his plans, in the worst-case scenario, he would be silenced. Knowing the truth, the protagonist bids farewell and leaves, wishing his master a peaceful death. In his thoughts, the protagonist never imagined the first person he would kill would be his master. Meanwhile, he carries the old man's body outside. The cultivation world is truly cruel. It's kill or be killed. If he continued being an honest person like in the past, he wouldn't have lived this long. A great catastrophe is about to fall on the Hingyu sect, and he has so many secrets. Or perhaps this is his chance to leave this place. Later, the rival sect leader invades the Hingyu sect, and Huanglong, along with his disciples, steps out to defend the place. They come face to face with the enemy, and one of the Hingyu masters tells the enemy that he doesn't need to do this, and he should think more carefully about his next actions. However, the Xian Dao leader says they know the reason, but they still keep arguing, and he says now that the place is vulnerable, their best option is to attack. He also says that after breaking the location's protective barrier, he will come after them. Then, like a meteor, he throws a rock toward the energy dome. To Jinren, surprisingly, this illusory magic is able to divide and dissolve his attack, but he still won't give up. He wonders how long this magic will withstand his attacks before breaking. Meanwhile, the leader, along with the others, concentrates their energy to maintain the shield. The high-level Hingyu masters have joined together for this, but that alone is not enough, so the leader orders that the disciples also be brought in to help. After that, he says that in the last 500 years, the greatest calamity of the Hingyu sect has fallen upon them today. Jinren says the barrier can withstand his strike twice, but now comes the 3rd. However, he still can't break the barrier. Below, one of the masters has already exhausted his energy. Jinren realizes that his attacks are weakening them. With that, he continues to attack the defense dome relentlessly. The masters using their energies begin to fall. From exerting themselves so hard to keep the barrier standing, Jinren just laughs at their faces. Then, he uses a magical gourd, and it begins to take effect on the force field. This is not good for them. The leader realizes that both of the elder stage founders have already used all their strength. Some disciples present are already starting to blame the protagonist for this, saying he stirred up a hornet's nest, bringing harm to the Hingyu sect. Zhou Shiji is the only one who defends him, saying that the Xian Dao sect is just looking for an excuse to attack, and even without the protagonist, they would have done it anyway. Speaking of him, Tai Zhu watches everything from afar and sees the fight among the strongest. The Xian Dao leader says this disproportionate magic is stronger than expected, and if a nascent stage magic is maintaining this magic, then he will show his most powerful ability. He says it's a pity, although to this day, the Hingyu sect has only had one sprout of foundation magic. One of the local elders, who is still standing, observes the others fallen around him. He tries to argue with Jinren, saying that both sects had a good relationship, and now he's being inhumane. Another elder says not to push further, as he will resist to the end. Jinren says that's great. Soon, he sucks the air from the area, pulling everything into his lungs. Then, he releases this air in the form of a scream, telling them to break the protection. After that, his large rocks hit the barrier once more, leaving everyone below desperate. The stones pierce the barrier and begin to destroy some houses, as well as bridges and other structures. They also fall on some people who couldn't escape in time, and hit everything around them. The local masters realize the protection is gone for good. Jinren says that some people from the local sect, at the nascent soul stage, have already died in a battle in the outside world, and that Hengyu is doomed, so if they join his sect, he will turn a blind eye to the fact that they hurt his disciple. One of the elders still tries to argue about the good relationship between them, but Jinren says no item will be taken, so they should stay quiet, because he wouldn't hesitate to kill the entire sect. The old men try to calm down and not further anger the enemy. One of them says he will accept Jinren's offer, but states that Hengyu Peak has been the sect's monastery for 1,000 years and that he has no right to give it away, only to lend it. Jinren laughs at the proposal and says he agrees to borrow the place for 1,000 years, and also wants the Zu Heaven Sword, as his nephew is interested in it. Such a proposal shocks the others. They think their sect is doomed and they will have to wait for an opportunity to ask to join the rival sect so they can continue practicing. Their leader speaks about the proposal. Huanlong draws the sword the enemy requested. He spins it as if in combat, and then throws it towards the enemy. But instead of fighting, he handed it over without resisting. As soon as Jinren grabs it, the dragon that inhabits the weapon tries to break free. Jinren tells it to be still, and tries to stabilize the sword. An elder tells everyone from the Hengyu sect that, when they leave, they should follow him. But Jinren says he has opened his doors to all disciples, and if they wish to join Xian Dao, they should go to his side. Out of fear, some from the Hengyu sect cross over to the other side. Only the leader and a few elders remain. The old man says that everyone has their own ambitions, and if they are not willing to follow him, then he won't force them. He stays by his leader's side, and asks those who remain what they will do. Wan Zhou, among them, says he wants to be stronger, so he can only stay. Elsewhere, Hao talks to the protagonist, and says he has no desire to go anywhere, so he will just return to his father's house. The protagonist is surprised by this, and asks Hao what happened to his cultivation. Hao tells him not to ask about it anymore, as it's complicated, and says he just wants to go home now, and asks where his friend is going. The protagonist thinks he has many secrets, and if he goes to the rival sect, he will have to face many unpredictable dangers, and he needs to prepare for that. The elder and the few who refuse to join the enemy leave. He and the leader leave the others behind, and they leave the Hengyu sect for good. Wan Zhou, who stayed, sees the protagonist and Hao still there, and thinks that they don't yet know how to adjust to their new environment. He bows before his new master, saying he is willing to become a disciple of the Xian Dao sect. Jinren laughs at the situation and says that from now on, the mountain belongs to the Xian Dao sect. On the other side, Hao says goodbye to his friend and tells the protagonist to be sure, as he will take care of their families. Tai Zhu wonders what happened to Hao and concludes that maybe it's related to his training, thinking that perhaps it's better for him to be immortal. Then the protagonist leaves the place on a floating cloud, and goes to the top of a hill. Now that he is alone, he decides to check his marble, noticing that in the sphere, the clouds have changed into leaves. According to the old man in the marble, the sphere already has the water element. Now it needs to be replenished with the wood element. The old man in the marble asks when the protagonist will search for the wood element. He replies that he's too weak right now and needs to isolate himself and train until the next stage. Taizhu asks what he needs to prepare for the foundation stage, as he doesn't know the chant for the founder stage anyway. The old man says it's a pity that for the techniques he has, one must be at the stage to be able to train them, so the protagonist needs to reach the foundation stage to learn. He also mentions the technique of infernal affluence, and the protagonist is shocked. But the old man says that it's fine, the power of this technique has no end, and the chances of reaching the foundation seed are the highest. After that, the protagonist lifts a rock, and places it in the cave's opening, sealing himself completely inside. He stays closed off there for a long time until some people pass nearby. The disciples say that the master is flying too fast, and they can't keep up with him, but the master says that the boy insisted on following him, even though he insisted that his disciple hadn't trained enough. One of his students says that when she looks at this place, it doesn't look like it did 4 years ago, and she asks why all these beasts are gathered on a mountain. The master says that some elders believe this place holds treasures and came to explore, but in the end, there was only a spiritual hole emitting energy. His young disciple says it's a shame because he wished there was a treasure nearby. The woman tells the child that he should wait a little, as they will capture a beast and return to the sect. The master tells them to come from afar and not cause any trouble. The woman agrees with him. As they fly over the beast area, she says that having a beast serve as a spiritual sword will greatly enhance their training, and fighting others for victory is no longer a dream. The master hopes to succeed this time, as this will give the junior the right to enter the back part of the mountain. The woman says it doesn't help because she was born in the Hongyu sect, then points to a place and asks what he thinks about it. He replies that the spiritual nature of that beast isn't bad, but looking at it up close, it's quite ordinary. The child says that he no longer needs to observe that beast. The master says it would make a great spiritual sword. Then, the beasts become a little more agitated. The master notices that they are staring at something specific. Soon, he realizes it's some kind of entrance that's closed. His disciples ask what it is. He replies that it's nothing and that it seems they've entered an area where someone powerful is residing. After that, a large source of energy pushes them away. The master sees his students falling and becomes concerned. He thinks that, with his Lingqi level of 12, under this mysterious gaze, it's as if he is being watched. Before hitting the ground, he manages to rescue them, and he thinks that whatever knocked them down is not a power that can be easily wielded. He introduces himself as Li Hai, the youngest disciple of the Xian Dao sect, stating that he is unaware of the training of the lord of the place, and, for his audacity, asks for forgiveness. The woman introduces herself as Su Fei of the Xian Dao sect and also asks for forgiveness. Li Hai thinks that if he were alone and the situation worsened, he could immediately escape, but his juniors are here, and if he goes alone, his master will find out. He also thinks that if he's in danger, he'll prioritize his own safety because he doesn't care about others, considering his own life more important. Su Fei continues justifying herself, saying that she did nothing intentionally to offend the local lord. However, a voice emerges from the cave, asking if her last name is really Su. She says yes and that she was once part of the Hongyu sect and now belongs to Xian Dao. Right after, the entrance of the cave begins to move, and a source of energy emerges, with the voice saying that she cannot leave. With that, a spiritual hand appears, reaching toward them. The hand tries to grab the woman, but Li Hai prevents both of them from being captured. Then, he flies away holding them. The energy of the hand returns to its source, and the entrance of the cave opens. From there, someone steps out who hasn't seen the light of day in a long time. It was Tai Zhu, 4 years older. As he exits, he thinks that the fact the Xian Dao sect is approaching can only be destiny. He spent the last few years training his Lingqi, and even though he finished, he still isn't able to surpass the founder stage. Situn Wan says that if the protagonist could acquire a high-level wood element and add it to the special marble, he could reach the foundation stage more easily. The protagonist thinks that first of all, he needs to change his clothes. He then manifests his power and summons a spiritual sword, the same one he took from his sect a few years ago. With it, he flies, and the old man asks if he knows where to go. Tai Zhu replies that there is a city in Zhao that is the best place to find what he needs. The old man says that he doesn't need to do all that. He could simply find someone in the foundation stage and steal their power, but for the protagonist, this isn't viable. Situn Wan says that he can help the protagonist, and if they find someone in that stage, he can help him take the power without killing, but ideally, they shouldn't have to resort to that. The protagonist tells the old man that he isn't cruel enough to kill someone just for his own benefit. With that, he gets a little distracted and loses focus. The old man takes the opportunity to provoke him a little. Tai Zhu says that if the old man hadn't taken him to the isolated forest to train, he wouldn't have any chance of getting lost. Situn Wan says that he's ungrateful and that he should take advantage of being in a large forest to search for the wood element. Back on the ground, the protagonist notices someone approaching on horseback. The stranger comments that he's having a terrible ride and plans to have a nice meal soon. His companion says they still have another day of travel before reaching the city and that he shouldn't let his guard down. The man notices the protagonist and comments that, as guards, they are not allowed to make mistakes. He says they will intercept him to see who he is. Noticing their approach, the protagonist becomes alert. The horseman heads toward him and stops by his side. After that, he introduces himself as the most powerful guard of Xucheng, Wangxin, and asks if the protagonist needs anything. The protagonist introduces himself and says he would like to know how to get to the city, also apologizing for interrupting the guard's path. Wangxin thinks that the protagonist doesn't seem like someone who trains, judging by his clothes. He says the city isn't far away and asks the protagonist what he plans to do there. The protagonist replies that he's just a student seeking knowledge. Other guards appear in the forest and ask what's happening. Wangxin says the protagonist is a student on his way to the city. The royal guard asks for the protagonist's name. He introduces himself as Wang Lin, saying this is his first time traveling far, and he got lost, hoping they could help him find his way. The guard also introduces himself, saying his name is Lu Sano from the Special Escort Department. With that, the protagonist says it's a pleasure to meet him. Lu Sano says he's welcome to join them on their way to the city, adding that meeting so far from home can only be fate. Tai Zhu climbs into the carriage, and he thinks it's strange that the guards are transporting these empty carriages. Wangxin asks the protagonist if he left home without any luggage. He replies that he encountered some bandits along the way, and it's a long story. The man says at least he made it out alive. He also says that, with him around, the protagonist can relax because if the bandits return, he'll take care of them himself. Looking out from the carriage, the protagonist thinks this is really sad. He sees some men lurking and says they aren't bad people, but it's a shame they don't know the dangers of the path they're on. The carriage passes by them without any problems. Night falls, and they are still heading to the city. The leader tells his companions that they will continue tomorrow, and today they will rest for a bit. They soon improvise a campsite. Wang Xin tells the protagonist that they will reach the city tomorrow, but now he wants to tell a story about a great bear. They gather around a campfire, and the leader of the guards introduces the protagonist to his lord. Lu Sano tells the protagonist that this is the great lord of the guard, and unlike the others, he knows things and already has some experience. His lord says Lu Sano doesn't need to praise him that much, but Lu Sano doesn't hold back in praising his lord, putting him on a much higher level than the others. In turn, the protagonist says that he really seems like a very intelligent person and that his eyes convey wisdom, living up to the praise. The Lord of the Guard says he feels the same about the protagonist and can see that the air around him seems to have unlimited potential. However, he says he has only studied a little and picked up some tips here and there. One of the men interrupts the conversation and asks Lord Wang to see his future because he wants to know if he will ever get married. Lu Sano says he's been bothering them about this the entire trip, and the Lord has already said everything he knew and even exhausted his energy. But he realizes the man didn't listen to anything that was said. Mr. Wang then decides to grant the request. At that moment, the protagonist's eyes focus on him. He notices that Wang is indeed putting a lot of energy into what he's doing. Wang concentrates on his thoughts. Soon, he opens his eyes and seems to have what he needs. He says that dark clouds are surrounding the man, and it looks like he's going to face a great disaster. But if he survives, he will get married in 3 months. Upon hearing this, he feels happy, as he doesn't believe a good guard could go through such a thing. When Wang looks at the others, he is shocked to see that all of them have disaster auras. He doesn't want to believe it, but thinks that his prediction has never been wrong. This doesn't look good for him, and he tells everyone that he sees a sign of blood looming, concluding that this cannot be a coincidence. Lu Sano feels uncomfortable with this information. For a moment, Wang tries to analyze the protagonist, but his eyes are a little blurred. However, when he manages to see clearly, something strikes him hard and prevents him from speaking. Tai Zhu thinks the fortune teller has good skills and is trying to help by seeing his future, but he is just making a fool of himself. The Marble Elder was having memories of a massacre, and Wang will not be able to handle that. Lu Sano asks the master what he saw and if the protagonist is involved in the deaths, but Wang says it's not like that. He states that his prediction says his abilities are insufficient to see the protagonist's future, and that his past is like the Azura Hell, so he cannot be human. As soon as he says that, one of the guards' heads falls to the ground. Lu Sano goes on high alert, and he shouts to the others, saying he will avenge his brother's death. The other guards get ready, and they tell whoever is out there, show yourself if you dare. However, the assassins just laugh at them. Their leader tells Lu Sano to hand over the item and they will leave, otherwise he will kill them all. Lu Sano recognizes the leader of the assassins as Song Xing and says he was really curious to know more about him. Song Xing says he heard from the guards that they are carrying a very valuable cargo, a 500-year-old ginseng, and demands they hand over the artifact. Lu Sano thinks that he must have discovered it through a spy. One of the guards immediately suspects the protagonist, but Wang says he's not a spy. Song Xing says he can't defeat Lu Sano today because his leader will personally take care of things and turn them into dog food. He soon realizes that his leader has arrived at the scene, and goes to greet him. The guards soon notice a fireball heading their way. One of them is hit, scaring the others. Then, they see a flaming sword. Wang Xin is astonished by this, and asks what exactly this weapon is. Lu Sano is also startled, and one of them says this is immortal magic. Song Xing says he's right, because his leader is immortal, and asks if they will hand over the item or not. They wonder what they will do, as they know they cannot fight someone immortal. Before they could say anything else, more fireballs come their way. The protagonist realizes that the enemy is hiding in a tree, and based on the strength of the fireballs, the person molding them is no more than a level 3 Lingqi. When he analyzes more closely, he notices that this person is familiar. Meanwhile, Wang tells Lu Sano to hand over the item and let the Dong family know they won't blame him, as the opponent is immortal, and mere mortals don't stand a chance. Lu Sano then accepts this. He takes the item he was holding, and places it on the ground for the enemy to take. However, the protagonist is the one who picks up the item and tells Lu Sano to wait a moment. With that, Lu Sano concludes that he really was a spy. The others think the same. But Song Xing knows that the protagonist is not with them and charges forward, trying to take the item from his hands. Tai Zhu realizes that they used a charm to hide the ginseng's qi. That's why it was undetectable. The protagonist uses his spiritual hand to push the attacker away. Then he asks if his old friend won't say hello. Their leader approaches, and his subordinates greet him with reverence. Taiju says he recognized him even though it's been a decade since they last met, but the leader of the assassins doesn't recognize the protagonist. Then, the protagonist takes out a talisman he had kept, but when the man sees the item, he shows no reaction. He says that regardless of whether the protagonist recognizes him or not, he must hand over the box, as it is vital to him. Taiju notices that someone else is watching them. Soon, he hands over the talisman and tells the man to forget about it, saying he mistook him for someone else. However, he notices a strange wind approaching, and sees someone descending from above. The guards who were still alive are intoxicated by something that knocks them out immediately. A more powerful being appears on the scene, and asks Zhang Hu if he knows the protagonist, but the disciple denies knowing him. The protagonist notices that the master seems to have a chi level of 15. Then, the master asks the protagonist if he recognizes his disciple, but Taiju says it makes no difference, and asks what his intentions are. The master says it really doesn't matter because the protagonist is only at level 8, and if he were to drink his blood, it would help with his training. However, Zhang tells his master that he recognizes the protagonist as a childhood friend and begs him to let him go. The master calls the disciple a traitor. Next, he begins uttering some words. This causes Zhang to feel a lot of pain, as if he's being controlled. Immediately, the protagonist intervenes and demands that the master release his friend, but the master reacts. He uses a spiritual sword to fight with the spiritual hand. They fight, but Zhang tells the protagonist to just run away. The master realizes that the protagonist can hold his flying sword, and finds this intriguing. Then, he withdraws his sword, leaving the protagonist confused, thinking his attraction art had failed. Taiju summons some plaques. The old man of the marble says the enemy's attraction art is quite strange, so he should be cautious. After that, the protagonist summons a serpent, and uses it to counterattack. The serpent attacks the enemy, and his sword is knocked away. He realizes the fight is going to get more intense. Before the sword falls, he uses air to manipulate it. The protagonist realizes there's something wrong with the sword. Then, the serpent is cut by the enemy's weapon, and returns to its plaque form. The enemy manages to manipulate the weapon without touching it. Soon, he directs the sword at the opponent, telling him to die. But the protagonist is clever, and manages to dodge the attack. Even so, he notices that the swords are very fast. He then uses another plaque to summon a shield. With that, the sword can't hit him. Taiju thinks he won't be able to hold on for much longer. If the enemy continues like this, the sword attack is very strong, and he thinks he can't keep defending much longer. His enemy notices something different, and says that the protagonist is not at chi level 8. Even though he's in the foundation stage, he won't survive his sword. The enemy withdraws the smaller sword, intending to use the larger one to attack. Taiju thinks this is the first time he's fought someone so strong. The enemy's cultivation is the same as his, but the sword is strange. If the enemy's flying sword were more powerful than the jade pendant the protagonist got from Chopin, he wouldn't be able to withstand the attacks. Then, he thinks he'll have to use his trump card, and the enemy notices this, and prepares to use his sword, this time energizing it with fire. But before he could use it, the protagonist, through a whirlwind, hurls it away. He feels satisfied that it worked. With that, he tries to manipulate the enemy's weapon, using one of his magical items. The golden plaque emits some magical inscriptions that alter the control of the sword. The enemy realizes that the item was made by a pill master, so, he discards the possibility of regaining control of the sword. With that, all he can do is flee. Seeing this, the protagonist doesn't accept it, and says he can't let the enemy live. The old man tries to use some item to escape, but they all fall from his hands. He realizes that the protagonist has captured him and panics, saying he is just a disciple of Master GMO, but his words are not enough to save him. Soon, he disappears completely, leaving only the sheath of his sword behind. With the golden artifact, the protagonist imprisoned the enemy. He listened to the advice of the old man of the marble, and divided the power of the jade pendant into 9 parts. For him, this was his toughest battle so far. The old man says that from now on, he will have to train on his own, as life or death will depend on personal growth. But the protagonist's attention is now focused on something else. He picks up the sword from the ground. However, its size is much smaller now. The old man notices this and says that such a sword is abnormal, and the scabbard seems to be of much more value than the blade itself. Taiju looks to the side and sees his friend. Still regaining consciousness, John realizes that his old friend has taken his master's magical treasure. He quickly asks if his master is dead. The protagonist confirms and asks if John pretended not to know him out of fear. John confirms and says that this place is not appropriate for them to talk. He wants to get rid of the assassins first, and then talk properly. So, he does just that. The treasure guards fear for their lives. but the protagonist helps them escape because they are not the target. Zhang attacks his former companions, and the assassins burn completely. They practically melt from the fire. The leader of the guards feels somewhat relieved but still anxious. The protagonist tells Zhang not to kill anymore, but Zhang says that if he doesn't, they might come back, as his master was a disciple of someone even more powerful and vengeful. One says they promised to keep what they saw a secret, but Zhang says that as soon as they return, GMO will find out by extracting their souls. Thus, the protagonist raises everyone present. He believes there is a magic in the jade pendant called Hushin Shu that can erase memories. He then finds the item in his inventory, and activates the magic right after, using it to erase the others' minds. Zhang is impressed by this. They feel a little dizzy, but still alive. Afterward, the protagonist calls his friend to leave. He goes ahead, flying away. His friend Zhang follows right behind. Far from there, in a remote area, Zhang calls his friend's attention, and says he cooked something and offers it to eat. Taizhu notices the food. It's a sweet potato, and he remembers when they first met, when he offered the same to Zhang. His friend says that after leaving the sect, he traveled around looking for other schools, and by chance, he took a pill and reached the Qi level. After that, he ran to Baijan, his master, who didn't kill him as long as he became his disciple and helped collect the essence of mortal blood. He even infected him with poison, controlling his life, which is why earlier he pretended not to know his old friend, but now that the master is dead, he feels freer. Taizhu realizes that the past few years have been tough for his friend and asks for more information about GMO to prepare against him. Zhang says that for sure his master's death will be investigated, and GMO is an eccentric in the pill-receiving stage who also protects his subordinates. The protagonist asks what kind of place Tingjia City is and why the old GMO would be cautious there. Zhang says the city is a relatively large family that cultivates in the north, and if saints wish to enter the city, they must pay a higher grade of spiritual stones. The protagonist asks if there is some kind of exchange meeting in the city. Zhang says yes, and every month, the nearby saints go there, then asks if his friend wants to go. Taizhu says he doesn't have many spiritual stones and depends on Zhang, but his friend says he's only afraid he won't go, but he'll take care of everything for him. Later, they head to the city, and the protagonist says that its size is not very large, more like a village. Zhang says that the people there are around Lingqi level 3, the same as him. The strongest one there is only level 13. Meanwhile, a vague energy flows through the place, and manifests at the front gate. The protagonist doesn't think that the person at level 13 is old yet, and has already reached the foundation establishment. Next, a strong wind comes their way. Taizhu holds onto his friend. From afar, he sees someone important, and already guesses who it is. One of those present tries to welcome him, but is completely ignored. Zhang asks what level of training the man who just arrived is at, and how he can have so much power by just waving his sleeve. His friend replies that it's foundation establishment stage, and they should hurry and enter the city. The next path costs 2 spiritual stones, and they continue toward their destination. After arriving at an inn, they pay the required fee. With that, they manage to get inside. Zhang says they should rest for the night, and continue the mission the next day. He also says they don't have many spiritual stones left, but fortunately, the 500-year-old ginseng will be sold for a good price, so they can split the profits. Under the natural sunlight, the protagonist focuses and tries to unravel the secrets of the sword. With his skills, he attempts to control it, and eventually manages to activate the weapon. However, he realizes the sword has a spirit trying to escape. It practically has a life of its own, moving as it pleases. The protagonist declares that he will teach it a lesson, and with one of his talismans, he uses it to capture the sword. As soon as he activates the item, the spirit within the sword dodges. Taizhu remains in a state of concentration, and notices that the sword is very clever, but says that, as long as it's in his hands, it has no chance of escaping. He sees that the sword has changed color to the same shade he takes on when he's in battle mode, and the way it moves seems connected to its color. If it's not controlled by an owner, every move it makes will consume a lot of energy. The Marble Elder says that the more intelligence the treasure has, the harder it will be to train. Even if the owner is dead, a huge amount of effort will be required to make it his. The flying sword will still move fast like a good treasure, so the Elder believes it cannot be trained. The protagonist tells the sword that it has nowhere to go, so it should behave and allow itself to be trained. He uses his hands to perform some kind of magic binding, and with the air from his mouth, Taizhu manages to surround the weapon, but the sword is stubborn, and escapes from that trap. Outside the room, Zhang calls the protagonist to go with him to the city's weapon shop, but he tells his friend that he is currently at the most critical stage of training, so Zhang must go alone. Zhang understands what he says, and thinks that the sword is so at ease that it's not even afraid of being reclaimed. Back in the room, the protagonist tells the elder that he spent an entire day and still couldn't master the sword, and doesn't know when he will succeed. The elder says that if the protagonist spends 10 years in isolation and uses a huge amount of Lingqi, he might be able to tame the sword. Since it's a rare and high-grade treasure, only someone who fully uses the testimony formation could master it. He says that if he had his body, he could easily train it, and that the normal method takes too long, but through blood arts it would be possible, with pros and cons. The sword would be damaged, but the protagonist would be able to dominate it in a short time, and he would also be affected 100 times more compared to other tactics. Tai Shu doesn't care about the collateral damage, and asks more about the blood arts. The elder says he will teach him, but he must promise to bring beautiful girls. Some time passes after this conversation. The protagonist is using his magic, combined with some storage plates. He invokes some magical words, and tries to capture the sword once again. Outside the room, Zhang waits. Afterward, the protagonist comes out, and his friend asks if he's okay. He replies that he is and thanks him for his concern. Zhang asks what technique he was training because he heard some strange noises coming from the room. The protagonist simply responds by summoning the sword from inside his mouth. His friend is impressed by the fact that he managed to master his former master's sword and asks why there's a strong smell of blood. Taiju says he has no idea about that, but confirms he managed to dominate the weapon. He also says that after completing the blood training, the sword will always emit a strong metallic blood smell, and the more people it kills, the stronger the scent will become. Zhang idolizes his friend even more, saying that with this sword, he can live a peaceful life without worrying about others hurting him. The protagonist says killing people is only for his safety, and his friend says that now he's much stronger than before. His attempt to capture the sword must have used a lot of energy, so Zhang tells him to rest and that after 3 days, there will be a trade fair in the city. Back in his room, the protagonist says that the sword's sheath is the same as C2 Nan's, and he wonders what rank he might be. He stares at the object for a while, thinking that he feels something strange, as the sword sheath just gave him an evil aura, deeply absorbing others into it. 3 days later, the friends are at the fair, and Zhang says there are a lot of people there, so it may take a while to sell the ginseng. Soon, the protagonist can go ahead and buy something. He looks at a stall with a wood element ingredient, but sees that it is too expensive. His entire family's fortune is only 10 medium-grade spiritual stones. As he walks a bit more through the market, he sees a book that catches his attention. On the cover, it's written that the book is about tactics. The seller says it costs 10 medium-grade pieces. The protagonist immediately buys the book. After Taiju buys the book, he thinks that he spent the whole day and only bought one item at the market. In addition to having spent all the spiritual stones he had, he quickly concludes that it's better to return to the inn. He looks near the inn and notices that, at this time of day, it should be crowded, but today there is no one, and it's very quiet. The inn's facade is covered by a dark mist, and the protagonist's pious vision is blocked. Suddenly, an unknown man appears, and says that his reaction is very quick. The blonde man tells 2 of his servants that they must stay there and wait for Zhang Hu's return. Then they must take his earth cultivation and imprison him immediately. The spiritual servants say that the mentioned person is still inside the Ting family's city, and by doing this, they would be going against the rules set by the elders. But the master says that if the great-grandfather asks, they should tell the truth, as Zhang planned with another outsider to kill his master, and he can't let this matter slide. They have no choice but to obey. After that, they notice someone approaching, and say that flying is forbidden in the Ting family's city, so he must stop. The protagonist thinks he'll have to carve his own path. He ignores the guard's warning and crosses the barrier. After that, they say to bring the talisman and go after the protagonist. Taiju, looking at the situation, says it's obvious they were waiting for his return, and if he didn't choose to flee, he wouldn't stay alive. He leaves his friend behind, but hopes that he can escape safely, as now he can only think about himself. However, the blonde man pursues him along with the others. The old man of the marble says that the pursuer has a nascent-level treasure, so the protagonist must focus and control his senses, and he will teleport him out of there. At the last second, he manages to escape. Several projectiles come his way, narrowly missing him. The old man says that the enemy is very young and already in the final foundation stage, and now that the protagonist is in chi condensation, he can't help much. After that, the blonde man says that for someone not at the same level of witness formation, the protagonist is the first to dodge his attacks, and says he wants to see how many times the opponent can escape. The old man says there's no end to this. Once again, the protagonist is attacked, but he manages to dodge. With that, the blonde man says this fight is getting more and more interesting. Taiju tries to fly away, but the blonde man follows him. His servants tell him to wait for them, but he ignores them. He thinks that, being in the last foundation stage, his speed is already very impressive, yet the protagonist always manages to dodge his attacks. To him, teleportation is an art that only nascent-level souls can master, but the protagonist isn't even at the foundation stage. possibly possessing some talisman. He adds that, initially, he wanted to capture him and do someone a favor, but now he definitely won't let the protagonist escape. Taiju realizes he's being followed, and thinks it's better to use his new summoning of the witness treasure, and invokes the sword. With it, he attacks the blonde man. But with a counterattack, the blonde man defends himself, and says it's like taking candy from a baby. However, what he didn't expect was for the sword to return and hit him in the back. He was lucky to be wearing armor. Even so, he didn't like being hit like that. The protagonist laments not being able to wound the enemy. In turn, the blonde man says that was close, and if that sword had pierced him, he would have been seriously damaged, even being in his final foundation stage. Moreover, judging by the sword's glow, it's definitely not a common weapon, even having a chance to kill him instantly if it had hit. He realizes that the protagonist not only may have a supreme talisman, but also a mysterious ladder, and says that soon, everything the protagonist has will be his. After moving away a bit, the protagonist tries to drink water from his gourd, but he realizes he's running out of spirit essence, and if he continues like this, there will be nothing left, so he'll have to refill it as quickly as possible. Even the old man is tired, as teleporting 3 times has drained much of his energy. Next, the protagonist realizes that the enemy has already located him. He knows that his spirit essence is running out, and he can no longer teleport. He also can't fly, as he'd be an easy target. Although he doesn't know why there's a suspicious layer of fog floating at the top of the forest, for him, it's still better than facing the enemy head-on. The blonde man is already a little tired. For him, this chase has used up all his spirit power, and if it weren't for the pills he brought, he would have given up some time ago. He says the forest is known for its secrets, and is always surrounded by fog. Even his great-great-grandfather was warned not to enter there recklessly. But for him, it doesn't matter, as he wants to get his hands on the protagonist's talisman at any cost. With that, he doesn't hesitate to enter the forest in pursuit of his goals. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.